LoveLore Library. Chapter 181. The outcome of this battle between a bicycle and an otherworldly horse-drawn carriage was decided in the first 100 meters. After rounding the crescent curve of the Aden Square, Meg looked back at the horse-drawn carriage that was already out of sight, and a nostalgic smile appeared on his face. He had participated in a bicycle race in university, and had placed quite well. Wow! It's so fast. They can't catch up to us at all. Father, you're the best. Amy looked back with elation. Sit tight, we're going to school. Meg smiled. Hearing his daughter's praise made him even happier than if he had won the Tour de France. He slowed down slightly, but still continued on his way to Chaos School. Meg had signed up for the Tour de France before, and his fastest speed on a flat road was 70 km per hour. That was already an average result. However, professional racing drivers could reach speeds of 80 km per hour. Even horse racing might not be able to match that speed, let alone horse-drawn carriages with two horses running side by side. However, Meg's current physical condition was a little weak, and after sprinting for a while, he began to feel a little out of breath. Thankfully, the system's modified bicycle was very good, and it could easily maintain a speed of 40 km per hour on flat ground. In contrast, the horse-drawn carriage was only going at about 25 km per hour, so there was no way it could catch up to him. Accompanied by the crisp sound of a bell, a black bicycle carrying two people passed through the Aden Square, attracting the attention of passers-by. A hater holding a black cloth bag on the side of the road looked up when he heard the sound of the bell. Meg just so happened to pass by him on the bicycle, and his eyes immediately lit up. Ha! What's this? There's no magic, no animal strength, and such a skinny man can travel so fast. What kind of machine is this? Could it be that he's already solved the problem of the huge consumption of human energy? Hey! Mister, wait up. The hater was getting more and more surprised, and he didn't care that he was already over 50 years old. He held the cloth bag with one hand, and waved as he ran. However, Meg, who was focused on riding, did not notice that someone was following him. Father, I think someone was calling us just now. Amy looked back in confusion, but there was no one behind them. Maybe they're distributing flyers. Meg didn't pay him any heed, and continued to pedal his bicycle forward. In any case, he didn't know anyone in Chaos City apart from the customers who came to eat at the restaurant. Even if he did meet a customer, they would at most greet him, and wouldn't have any interactions or important matters. Dean Hater, why are you in such a hurry? Do you need to ride with us? A horse-drawn carriage stopped beside Hater, and Dicus looked at Hater with a hint of surprise in his voice. Hello, Grandpa Hater. Udir, who was still chewing on his scallion pancake, also shouted. He slowly put down the scallion pancake in his hand, looking a little scared of Hater. Oh, it's little Dicus. Let me get in the car. Help me chase after a man who was riding a two-wheeled thing. Hater's eyes lit up at the sight of Dicus, and he panted heavily as he climbed onto the carriage. Is it the young man with a little girl in a red and black cloak? A peculiar expression appeared on Dicus' face upon hearing that. You know him. Hater was a little surprised. Not really, but if you want to find him, you don't have to rush. His destination is Chaos School, so he's most likely a parent who's sending his child to school. That's your territory. Dicus shook his head with a smile, and instructed, Old Huang, go to Chaos School. Hurry up. With a snap, the carriage sped up again. What are you doing? Dicus looked at Hater, who was sitting across from him. His half-bald head was covered in sweat, and he was panting heavily. His cheeks were also slightly flushed. It was very rare for the old dean of the Chaos School's mechanical school to appear like this. It's good that you can't run. You didn't tire me to death. Hader heaved a sigh of relief upon hearing that. He leaned against the wall of the carriage and said, I saw that the thing he was riding was very strange. He looked so thin and frail, but he was able to travel so quickly with a little girl on his back. There were no magic fluctuations during the entire process, it was purely mechanical, and it didn't seem to be exhausting at all. If that's really the case, then perhaps this thing can replace horse-drawn carriages as a means of transportation for people. Yes, I followed him because I thought that thing was very strange. That thing is light and simple, and it's also more agile. It's easier to control than a horse, and it doesn't produce any feces. It would definitely be a good thing for city management if it can be popularized. Dicus nodded with an expectant smile. Dicus, you really think from the perspective of a city manager. If there are more officials like you, then the principal's blueprint can be popularized even more quickly. Looks like you're going to be promoted again in a few years. Hader looked at Dicus with approval in his eyes. You're too kind, Principal. It's my job to do what I need to do. Your pursuit of knowledge is what we should learn from you, Dicus replied in a humble manner. The bicycle stopped in front of Chaos School without making any sound. The orc security guard and the gatekeeper looked over at the same time. Their gazes were drawn to Meg's bicycle, which had a metallic sheen to it. The white steel rims and wires on the wheels were very eye-catching under the morning sun. This was the first time they had seen a bicycle with two wheels, one in the front and one in the back. Their gazes then fell on Meg and Amy, and they immediately recalled that they seemed to have come to the school a few days ago. After that, they ran into the school and left through the school gates. Who would have thought that they would come again today? We're here. Let's get off. Meg was just about to get off the bicycle and carry Amy off. This is so fun. I'm so happy. Amy had already stood up. She grabbed onto the handlebars and jumped onto the ground. She looked up at Meg with an elated expression on her little face. Then Daddy will take you to school every day from now on. Meg parked the bicycle and put on the triple alarm anti-theft lock that came with the system. He picked up Ugly Duckling, which was lying on its back in the basket. It was still looking up at the sky with its front paws curled up. Its eyes were unfocused, and it was completely dumbstruck, as if it still hadn't recovered from the shock. Chapter 182. Wake up, Ugly Duckling. We're here. If you don't wake up, I'm going to set you on fire, Amy threatened in a low voice as she walked up and pinched Ugly Duckling's chin. Meow. Ugly Duckling's eyes widened, and it almost jumped out of Meg's hands. It quickly focused on Amy, and shook its head to indicate that it was awake. Amy, carry it. Meg handed Ugly Duckling to Amy with a smile, and then took down the thermos and the Yangzhou fried rice hanging on the handlebars. He looked at his watch. It took him almost half an hour to walk from the restaurant to the entrance of Chaos School, but it only took him 5 minutes today. The increase in speed brought about efficiency. The temperature of the Yangzhou fried rice is just right, but the tofu pudding. Meg looked at the thermos in his hand. The tofu pudding had probably fallen apart during the vigorous exercise just now, but it shouldn't affect the taste too much. Anyway, he still had to take the money. But if this bicycle is used for short-distance takeout, it would be a good choice. Meg raised an eyebrow. He thought of the scene of riders in yellow and green vests delivering deliveries on bicycles, and his expression became a little strange. As for those who needed to travel longer distances, perhaps he could find some abject knights to serve as delivery men on horseback. That way, a complete delivery network could be set up. Forget it. Let's not think about that for now. The restaurant is busy enough now. Meg shook his head with a smile. He took Amy's little hand and said, "Let's go to class." They walked toward the school gate. Outsiders are not allowed in the school. The orc raised his hand to signal Meg to stop. He was a little vigilant. This guy had run into the school from nowhere last time. This time, he had to keep a close eye on him. He couldn't let him in so easily. "Father, let's sneak in through that hole." Amy looked at the orc with a little fear. She tugged at Meg's clothes and whispered. She had been kicked out by this orc several times before, and was a little traumatized. Children who are not of age are not allowed to go to school. This little girl is still too young. The old man glanced at Amy and shook his head. In his heart, he had already rejected the possibility of the two of them entering the school. In the end, he added, "Also, pets are not allowed on campus. This is a rule set by the headmaster." Meg gently placed his hand on Amy's head, indicating for her not to be nervous. Then, he took out a small green card from his pocket and handed it to the orc. He smiled and said, "I'm here to send my child to school. Today is her first day of school. Teacher Crassus said that I can use this card to enter and leave the school. May I know which direction is the Magic Academy?" Teacher Crassus. The orc and the old man's faces were filled with confusion. For a moment, they couldn't remember that there was such a teacher in the school. When they took the green card and looked at it, their expressions changed. There were only 3 words written on the card, "Pass," and a name was written at the bottom right corner, Novin. It was a very simple card, but because of the name at the bottom right corner, it was not simple at all. The two of them suddenly recalled that the white-bearded old man at the school gate yesterday afternoon had also come to school early in the morning. They remembered that the headmaster had given him a green pass before he left yesterday. They didn't think that it would end up in Meg's hands. This person's identity is definitely not simple. That was the first thought that flashed through their minds. They immediately looked at Meg and Amy in a different light. Even though the headmaster was usually very amiable in the school, everyone knew that he was the only person in Chaos City who dared to challenge and confront the city lord and the lord of the city. However, that old man from yesterday was completely treating him like a senior. The Magic Academy is on the left side of the school gate. Go all the way to the end. Please keep your pass well. You can send your child in now. The orc looked at Meg with a smile as he handed the pass back to Meg. His attitude was completely different from before. He didn't seem to be fawning over Meg. Instead, he seemed more like one of his own. We can go through the gate today. Amy's eyes lit up, and a surprised smile appeared on her little face. In the past, she had always snuck into the school through that small hole. She had always envied her brothers and sisters for being able to enter the school through the main gate. She didn't think that she would be able to do so today. "All right, thank you." Meg nodded with a smile as he put away the pass. He took Amy's little hand and prepared to go through the gate. "I'm sorry, pets are not allowed to enter Chaos School." The orc blocked their way again as he looked at Ugly Duckling in Amy's arms. "That's the pass." Meg turned over the green card in his hand. Judging from the two's expressions, it was most likely issued by some important figure in Chaos School. The pass was issued by the principal, but the rules were also set by the principal. The principal said that the school rules take precedence, so your cat can't enter the school, the orc said with a serious expression, neither servile nor overbearing. Meg was a little surprised that this orc wasn't willing to negotiate at all. He was a very principled and law-abiding person. Furthermore, the owner of the card was the principal of Chaos School. He was an interesting person. It was rare to see a principal who would put the school first. "All right, then I hope you can look after my car and my kitten." "Thank you." Meg didn't want to pester him. There was nothing wrong with the rules. There were only children in the school. Ugly Duckling wasn't aggressive, but it was a different story if it was a large dog. "We will ensure their safety." The orc nodded solemnly, and his attitude toward Meg softened a lot. This was a reasonable person. Meg looked at Amy and said, "Amy, put Ugly Duckling in the basket first. It can't accompany you to class. It will wait for you at home with me." "All right." Amy nodded obediently. She tiptoed and put Ugly Duckling in the basket of the bicycle. She patted Ugly Duckling's head and said seriously, "Ugly Duckling, you have to be good at home and listen to father. Let's go." Meg held Amy's little hand and walked into the school. Meow, Ugly Duckling stuck its little head out of the basket and looked at Amy's back pitifully. Amy walked a few steps and then stopped. She turned back to look at Ugly Duckling and said, "Be good. I'll let you eat 2 bowls of tofu pudding when I come back today, and you don't have to run." Meow, meow. Ugly Duckling's eyes lit up immediately, and it nodded happily. Communication between foodies is indeed so simple and direct. Meg shook his head with a smile, and then walked in with Amy. Chapter 183. He just went in. The orc pointed inside the gate. He looked at Hater, who was sweating profusely, and nervously asked, "Principal Hater, are you looking for him?" "Nothing important." "Where did he go?" Hater asked as he bent over to examine the bicycle. He asked around for the location of the Magic Academy. "He should have gone there. He said his daughter is going to school," the old man beside him quickly replied. "Magic Academy?" Hater stood up with a conflicted expression. He hesitated for a moment before pursing his lips. "Forget it. I'll wait for him here. None of those old bastards at the Magic Academy like me." After that, he continued to examine the bicycle. "Aren't outsiders not allowed to enter the school?" Dacus asked curiously as he got out of the car. As the main liaison officer between the City Lord's Castle and Chaos School, he was very clear about the rules of Chaos School. Principal Novin had brainstormed these rules to ensure the independence and purity of Chaos School. Even if the City Lord were to come to Chaos School, he wouldn't be able to bring his blazing lion into the school. However, after being smashed by Principal Novin's ice ball for half a month, it probably wouldn't want to set foot in Chaos School for the rest of its life. He has the principal's pass. According to the rules, he can enter Chaos School, the old man guarding the gate said calmly. He was able to maintain his composure in front of Dacus. "I see." Dacus' eyes lit up. Principal Novin's pass was very special. Even though it was in Principal Novin's name, it was actually the only pass recognized by Chaos School. He had one with him, but that was because he represented the City Lord's castle. Principal Novin had met him personally before he received the pass. He had promised that he wouldn't interfere with the school's teaching and wouldn't do anything to harm the students. He had to abide by all the school's rules before he received the pass. But who was that person just now? How did he get Principal Novin's pass? And that little girl is about the same age as Udir, so she shouldn't be old enough to enter Chaos School. How did he send her to the Magic Academy? Is he a noble or a genius magic caster? Dacus had a lot of questions in his mind, but he didn't ask. From his standpoint, he couldn't ask too many questions. However, one thing was for sure, that person was not only interesting, but also mysterious. The principal's pass. Heidel was also a little surprised to hear this, but he didn't ask any questions after taking a glance at Dacus. He continued to walk around the bicycle, and his eyes were almost glued to it. He was getting brighter and brighter as he muttered to himself, "Genius, this is definitely a genius." What kind of ingenious method did he use to make the iron wire so uniform in thickness and perfectly compress the iron sheet into a ring? Meow. Just as they reached the front of the cart, a sharp cat's cry suddenly sounded. Ugly Duckling immediately stood up from the basket and gripped the edge of the basket with its front paws as it bared its fangs at Heidel in a threatening manner. Heidel, who had been staring at the bicycle, was startled. He fell to the ground and looked at the cute kitten that was poking its head out of the basket. He didn't know whether to laugh or cry. "Whose cat is this? Why did you put it here?" he asked. "Principal, are you okay?" The orc and Dicus hurried over to support him. The orc then said, "This is that person's cat." "I'm fine. Let me do some more research." Hater waved a hand. He pointed at Ugly Duckling and warned, "Don't be naughty, little one." He then squatted down to study the gear. Meg and Amy walked around the school, and finally found building number 3. Unlike the magical buildings with skulls and green lights, this 3-story building was no different from the other buildings in Chaos School. There was a drawing of a witch sitting on a broom, and a golden ball flying not far away. It was like a child's doodle. It wasn't very beautiful, but it was full of innocence. A witch that can fly. "Father, will Amy be able to sit on a broom and fly around like her in the future?" Amy looked at the witch, and her eyes lit up as she asked expectantly. "You should be able to fly, but you don't have to sit on a broom." Meg smiled. Crassus might know some flying magic, but as a melee magic caster, he had no right to challenge a long-range magic caster if the battlefield was limited to the ground. Meg held Amy's little hand as they walked into the school building. Classes started at 7:30, so there was no one there at the moment. However, the light in the school building was very bright, and it didn't feel oppressive at all. Unlike normal school buildings, there were no windows in the classrooms here, and there were only 2 magic classrooms on each floor. They climbed up to the 3rd floor. There was only one magic classroom on this floor. The door was wrapped in a layer of black metal, and it was ajar. Light shone through the gap in the door. Meg went up and knocked on the door. "You're here. You're very punctual." The heavy door slowly creaked open, and Crassus in a white robe looked at the 2 standing at the door with a smile. "It's the first day of class." "I don't dare to be late," Meg said with a smile. "Hello, Master Crassus." Amy looked at Crassus with a serious expression. Crassus was taken aback. He looked at Amy with surprise. "Father said that we have to call him that in school," Amy explained. Amy explained with a happy smile on her face. "Then when we're not in school, can we call him Master Halfbeard?" "Little Amy, you can call me whatever you like." Crassus looked at Amy's bright smile, and his mood also brightened. She was so happy to change the way she addressed him, so of course he had to satisfy her. Of course, being called Master Crassus by Amy was a different feeling. It felt more formal. Meg's education was better than expected. Amy's eyes then fell on the 2 things in Meg's hands, and her eyes lit up. "Mr. Mac, did you bring tofu pudding for me too?" "Yes, but it was a bit bumpy on the road, maybe." Meg nodded and said hesitantly. "It's okay. It doesn't matter if it's gone. It's still delicious anyway." Crassus shook his head with a smile and interrupted Meg. He took the thermos and Yangzhou fried rice from him and walked into the classroom. "Mr. Mac, if you're busy, you can go back first. I'll bring little Amy back for lunch at noon." "All right, I'll have to trouble you." Meg smiled. He squatted down and looked at Amy. "Amy, listen to Master Crassus and study hard. Father will go home first." Yes, I will." Amy nodded seriously. She looked at Meg reluctantly, but when she looked back at the magic classroom with all kinds of strange things, she was more expectant. "Go." Meg smiled and stroked Amy's hair. He watched her enter the classroom for a while, then closed the door and walked toward the school gate. Chapter 184. Someone stole an electric scooter. That was the first thought that flashed through Meg's mind. However, on second thought, there was no such thing as an electric scooter in this world. It was just that the sound of the alarm was too similar. Logically speaking, there shouldn't be such a sound in this world. Could it be that triple alarm anti-theft lock? Someone stole the scooter. Meg's expression suddenly became a little strange, and he quickened his pace. In his previous life, his scooter had been stolen several times. Some of them were professional racing scooters, and some of them were even limited edition. He still felt the pinch, and hated bike thieves to the core. When Mag arrived at the school gate, he looked out, and was immediately taken aback by what he saw. There was already a group of people surrounding the bicycle, and all of them were standing on their tiptoes and craning their necks to look inside. Some of them were parents who had brought their children here early in the morning, some of them had the Chaos School teacher badge on their chests, and some of them were passers-by who had been drawn here by the alarm. The ear-piercing alarm came from the middle of the crowd, accompanied by a few cat meows. "What's going on now?" Meg raised an eyebrow. It seemed that the scooter hadn't been stolen. After all, the old man and the orc were standing at the side watching. "You're here. Look at this." The old man's eyes lit up when he saw Meg. However, he was a little speechless when he saw the crowd around the scooter. "This is..." Meg was a little confused. A scooter shouldn't attract such a crowd, right? "Principal Hater, the person you're looking for is here." The orc also stood on his tiptoes and shouted into the crowd. "He's here. All right, the owner is here. Let's disperse. There's nothing to see here." Hater's voice came from the crowd, and the crowd immediately parted to make way for Hater and the scooter. They all looked at Meg. "Hello, young man. I'm Hater, the principal of the Chaos School's School of Mechanical Engineering. I saw you riding this scooter past me this morning, and I'm very curious about what it is. Did you invent this all by yourself?" Hater asked Meg with a smile on his face, but his eyes were filled with urgency. This novelty two-wheeled object piqued everyone's curiosity. It was completely different from a horse-drawn carriage. It was like an exquisitely carved piece of art, and was very eye-catching. Many people thought that it was a new sculpture from Chaos School. Of course, what made everyone even more curious was how this thing could make such an ear-piercing sound. Could it be magic? Or was there a life form that could make sounds hidden inside? Hearing Hater's question, everyone looked at Meg, wanting to hear his explanation. "Hello, Dean Hater. This is a bicycle. Let's say I invented it." Meg saw that the scooter was in perfect condition, and Ugly Duckling was still in the basket. It was meowing happily at the sight of Hater, so he immediately felt relieved. He walked up to Hater with a smile. Chaos School was divided into the primary school and the High School. The primary school was similar to compulsory education, while the High School was similar to a university. In order to provide all kinds of talents to the Grey Temple and the City Lord's Castle, it was divided into all kinds of departments, such as the School of Magic, the School of Mechanical Engineering, the School of General Languages, and so on. This old man, who should be over 60 years old, was the principal of the School of Mechanical Engineering. It was not difficult to understand why he was so interested in the scooter. "Scooter," Hater murmured softly. His eyes lit up. A bicycle that could walk on its own. What a wonderful name. He looked at the scooter that was still meowing, and said apologetically, "I'm sorry, young man. I just touched your scooter, and it wouldn't stop meowing." Everyone was also looking at Mag with curiosity in their eyes. They wanted to know if Mag had cast some kind of magic on top of the cliff to make it yell so incessantly. "Oh, it's all right. It's just an anti-theft alarm." Meg shook his head with a smile. He touched the scooter's lock, and the scooter was unlocked. The alarm was immediately deactivated, and the scooter was automatically unlocked. Meow, meow, ugly duckling meowed at Meg with a hint of eagerness in its eyes. However, it then turned toward the school as if it were looking for Amy. Amy has gone to class. She won't be home until noon. Let's wait for her at home. Meg patted Ugly Duckling's head. He caught sight of Dykes in the crowd, and nodded with a smile. He had just won the scooter race. He kicked off the scooter, and prepared to go home. The restaurant was going to be open for business soon. Dykes also nodded with a smile. He had completely accepted his loss. Furthermore, Meg was able to obtain a pass from Novan, so he was definitely not an ordinary person. I have a few questions about this scooter that I want to ask you. Do you have time to come to my office to discuss them with me? I've been researching a way to make a scooter run on its own. If you can, perhaps you can join me in my research. Hader looked at Meg with an earnest expression. The principal is inviting him to join his research. The School of Mechanical Engineering has been researching this for several decades. That's right. Apparently, the principal said 15 years ago that all participants would be handsomely rewarded for their research. There have been many people who have tried their best to get in, but even now, there are only 7 core members, all of whom are top-notch blacksmiths and machinists. All of the teachers in the school began to discuss quietly among themselves. Dykes was also quite surprised. He knew a little about Hader's research, and the city lord's castle was also very concerned about it. In fact, they had even set up a special fund to support it. If they succeeded, perhaps they would be able to completely change this world, regardless of whether it was life or war. Sorry, I have to go back and cook. Perhaps we can talk about it when I have time. Meg shook his head with a smile as he climbed onto his scooter. He gestured for Ugly Duckling to sit down, and prepared to leave. It was almost time for the restaurant to open, so he really did have to go back and cook. Cook. Hader's eyes widened with incredulity as he stared at Meg. Never did he think that his request would be rejected, and with such a reason. He actually rejected it. Everyone present was also looking at Meg with astonishment on their faces. This was an extremely enviable opportunity, yet Meg had turned it down in such a nonchalant manner, as if it wasn't even as important as his cooking. Was he being arrogant? Or was he being an idiot? Interesting. Dykes looked at Meg, and the smile on his face widened. Mr. Meg, what brings you here? Right at this moment, Luna walked over from across the street with a small bag in her hand, and was quite surprised to see Meg. Good morning, young Mistress Luna. Meg also nodded with a smile. Luna was wearing a long black dress today, and the scarf with the golden lily flower embroidered on it was still draped over her shoulders. It appeared that she really did like that scarf. I'm taking Amy to class at the Magic Academy. You can come by the restaurant often when you have time. I'm going back now. Alright, take care. Luna nodded as she looked on at Meg's departing figure with a surprised expression. What kind of special vehicle was that? He's leaving. And he's so fast. He's even faster than running. Everyone was also quite surprised at the sight of Meg's departing figure. Chapter 185. Some of the passers-by quickly left, and the teachers and Dykes all turned to look at Luna. Meg left in a hurry, and disappeared from everyone's sight in the blink of an eye. Luna looked as if she had known him for a long time. Yes, he's the parent of a student. Principal Hader, do you have any questions? Luna didn't understand why everyone was staring at her, but she still nodded at Hader. Hader was elated to hear that, but then nervously asked, do you know where he lives? He owns a restaurant in the Aiden Square. It's at the other end of the Aiden Square. If you want to find him, you'll be able to find him there. Luna smiled. After that, she added, Mr. Meg's cooking is really delicious. He really does go back to cook. Everyone was speechless. They had thought that Meg was just making up an excuse, but they didn't think that he really did run a restaurant. However, compared to running a restaurant, joining Hader's team was much more promising. The monthly allowance was no less than 100 gold coins, while the average new teacher only made around 30 gold coins. How much could a restaurant earn? A restaurant owner. Dikis was also a little surprised. He had thought that Meg's background would be very special, and he might even have a background in Rodu. Who would have thought that he was just a restaurant owner? How did he get a pass from Principal Novin? Meg? All right, thank you. Hader nodded with relief. Now that he knew the location, he didn't have to worry about missing out on that young man. There were many things on that bicycle that piqued his interest. The black and elastic material wrapped around the metal wheels, the iron chain that rotated the rear wheel, the set of complicated gears, and even the high-strength but very light material of the frame, these things almost overturned his decades of mechanical research. He was usually known as the titan of the mechanical world, but when he saw Meg's bicycle today, he felt as if he had lived for decades in vain. It had completely overturned his worldview. If it weren't for the fact that he still had class in the morning, he would have gone to Meg to discuss this matter. Luna nodded before making her way into the school. She was still a little perplexed as to why Headmaster Heidel was suddenly so interested in Meg. She suddenly stopped in her tracks, and murmured to herself, could it be that the School of Mechanics has also discovered that Mr. Meg is an arithmetic prodigy? That can't be right. Although the School of Mechanics has a lot of applications for arithmetic, they don't do much research, so they don't need a special talent in this field. Luna quickly refuted herself. She stopped and looked in the direction of the School of Magic, then continued to walk toward the school building. Amy isn't even old enough to go to school, so how did she get into the school? Principal Hader, have you made any progress in your research? Dikis asked Hader with a smile. He was responsible for the City Lord's Castle's special fund, and he was also responsible for following up on the progress of the project. We've basically solved the problem of converting steam into kinetic energy, but how to transfer this energy to other objects, or even replace horses, has been a problem for our team for a long time. Hader shook his head. He looked in the direction of the Aiden Square, and a smile appeared on his face as he said, however, I saw a lot of good things on that young man's bicycle. If he can join our team, perhaps we'll see the first steam car on the streets of Chaos City soon. Steam is going to change the world. Good luck. I hope I'll be able to ride a steam car in the near future, Dikis said with a smile. He also looked in the direction of the Aiden Square. That man named Meg really did seem to be an extraordinary person. Meg rode his bicycle toward the restaurant at a moderate speed. He still had to cook later, and if he was sweating, he had to take a shower first. When he passed by Julian's magic potion shop, he greeted Black Coal and Green Pea. Ugly Duckling, who was lying in the basket of the bicycle, called out to Green Pea upon hearing Green Pea's voice, but it was still looking up into the sky in a daze. There seems to be more and more people here. Meg raised an eyebrow at the sight of the long line at the entrance. It was still early in the morning, and the restaurant hadn't even opened for business yet, but there was already a line of dozens of people waiting outside. All of them were looking at Meg with surprise on their faces. Mr. Mac, what's that thing you're riding? Harrison asked curiously as he looked at Meg. It's a bicycle. I use it to take my kids to and from school. It's not much of a treasure, Meg replied with a smile. He nodded at the customers who were greeting him, and took out his keys to open the door. A bicycle? The customers were even more confused. They had seen Meg riding his bicycle very quickly, but he was able to maintain his balance on two small wheels. Mr. Mac was most likely very powerful. Boss! Yabamiya called out to Meg from the entrance. She was also looking at the bicycle parked outside with curiosity. Meg opened the door and held it closed. He turned to Mia and said, "Mia, help me move the bicycle inside. Ugly Duckling is carsick, so let it rest in the basket for a while." Oh, okay. Yabamiya hurriedly nodded. She stepped forward and carefully lifted the bicycle with both hands. It was much lighter than she had expected. It looked like it was made entirely of metal, but it felt weightless in her hands. "We'll open in 10 minutes. Please wait for a moment, everyone," Meg said to the customers with a smile. He gently closed the door. "Just put it under the counter," Meg said to Yabamiya. Although it wasn't very gentlemanly to ask a girl to do heavy work, he had to admit that Yabamiya was at least 10 times stronger than Meg. Lifting a carbon fiber bicycle was no different from lifting an apple for an ordinary person. "Ugly Duckling doesn't seem to be doing well," Yabamiya said worriedly as she looked at Ugly Duckling, which was rolling its eyes in the basket. "Don't worry. It'll be fine after a while." Meg walked over and took a look at Ugly Duckling, which was still dizzy. He went upstairs and changed into his chef's suit. As he tied his apron, he said, "By the way, Mia, if you have a bowl of tofu pudding and a rujiamo for 3 meals, you can have a bowl of tofu pudding in the morning. That'll make up for your expenses." Yabamiya hurriedly waved her hands. No, it's fine. Didn't we agree on 2 meals?" Chapter 186. "Thank you, boss." Yabamiya felt a lump in her throat when she saw Meg's gentle gaze. She didn't refuse and put a spoonful of tofu pudding into her mouth. The sweetness melted in her mouth and spread all the way to her heart. Meg glanced at Yabamiya's scarred hands and went into the kitchen. Every 18-year-old girl liked to look pretty. As an employee of the restaurant, beauty treatments were a must. Besides, there was still 200 yuan left. Considering Yabamiya's performance, Meg wouldn't take it from her. After all, her arrival had doubled the efficiency of the restaurant. Yabamiya quickly finished her tofu pudding. She licked the syrup from the corner of her mouth, and a blissful smile appeared on her face. Eating a sweet tofu pudding in the morning seemed to make her feel better all day. She picked up the bowl and walked into the kitchen. "Let's get ready to open for business. The rujiamo has decreased by 1/3 this morning, but there are 200 more tofu puddings. It will be busier than yesterday. Amy isn't here, so you have to take care of the money. Can you do it?" Meg put the bowl in his hand on the last empty spot on the stove and turned to Yabamiya. "Okay, I'll do my best. Amy has already taught me the multiplication table." Yabamiya nodded earnestly. "Okay, good luck." Meg nodded with a smile. He didn't expect Yabamiya to be so studious and Amy to be a teacher. The morning was busier than expected. Meg and Yabamiya were finally free when the restaurant was closed. "Sit down and rest for a while." Meg turned the "Open for Business" sign over the door and sat down at the table by the door. He looked at Yabamiya, who also looked a little tired. "It's okay. I'm not tired." Yabamiya went into the kitchen and poured a cup of warm water. She put it in front of Meg and looked at him. "Drink some water. Let me massage your shoulders and back." "Thank you." Meg took a sip of the water and gestured for Yabamiya to sit down. "No rush. Mia, sit down first. I have something to ask you." "Go ahead." Yabamiya sat up straight and looked at Meg. "Don't be nervous. Just treat it as a routine meeting." Meg smiled and gestured for Yabamiya to relax. Her blonde hair was tied into a side braid, and her pale face had become rosy and healthy over the past few days. In the past, she couldn't even fill her stomach, let alone nourish herself. After arriving at the dining hall, she could finally eat her fill. She was at the age of puberty. In just a few days, she seemed to have grown a little taller. Even the maid uniform on her body had become a lot tighter, outlining her perfect figure. "I'm wondering if we should hire another service staff member," Mag said to Mia. "Boss, did Mia do something wrong? Don't you want Mia to continue working as a waitress?" Mia stood up and looked at Meg anxiously. "No, Mia. You misunderstood." Mag looked at the agitated Mia, and waved his hand with a smile as he said, "It's like this. Amy will be going to school officially from today onwards. Apart from after school, you might have to do the cashier's work all the time. That's too much work for you, so I was wondering if I should hire another service staff member to take care of the cashier's work and collect the money and clear the tables." Mia was stunned. She was worried that Meg was dissatisfied with her work. She didn't expect him to think that she was too busy. She quickly shook her head. "No, I don't think my work is hard at all. In fact, I'm happy doing it." "It's just that." "Just what?" Meg asked. "It's just that, if you think Mia is too clumsy and can't do her job well, then please hire another employee. Mia's salary can be halved," Mia said, wringing her hands. She lowered her eyes and didn't dare to look at Meg. "Of course not. Mia is the most diligent and efficient waitress I've ever seen. She's also the best at making customers happy. After this month's probation, I'm going to give you a raise." "Why would I cut your salary?" Meg looked at the nervous Mia. He was touched by her attitude toward this job. He thought about it and nodded. "If that's the case, then I'll ask Mia to take on more work. If it's too hard, you must tell me." Yes, boss. I'll work hard." "It's not hard at all." Mia's eyes immediately lit up, and an energetic smile appeared on her face again. She walked over to Mag and said, "Let me give you a shoulder massage. You've been busy all this time." "Thank you." Meg nodded with a smile. He closed his eyes and enjoyed Mia's massage. After working in the kitchen for an hour and a half, he was indeed tired. However, he was happy that he had saved up 10,000 gold coins in the morning. He could buy a strength point. "System, I want to buy a strength point." Mag was starting to get a little impatient. He had had enough of this body that made him unable to breathe after sprinting for a while. Once he recovered to his normal physical fitness, he should be able to recover his lean and muscular figure very quickly. Of course, the most important thing was that after he returned to normal, it would be time to get a big sword. Right now, he only had a brain full of tricks. Unfortunately, his body couldn't keep up. As the restaurant's business became more and more popular, there would be more and more people coveting it. Peers, hooligans, city officials. These were all jackalls who came for the scent of money. Although there were two great gods, Crassus and Julian, in this magical world, there was nothing more reassuring than having one's own strength. Since he could use a sword, Meg hoped that he could stand in front of Amy when he was in danger. He didn't want her to risk her life to protect him. "The first strength point will cost 10,000 gold coins. Are you sure you want to buy it?" The system's voice sounded. It sounded a little excited. "Why are you even more excited than me? Aren't you a proper god of cooking system?" Meg said with a little disdain. "Ahem. The system recommends that the host complete the mission seriously and obtain the strength points through proper channels. However," the system's voice became serious again. "Then I won't buy it," Meg said calmly. "However, I haven't finished speaking yet." The system suddenly became anxious. It hurriedly said, "However, the host is working hard to earn money and want to recover his body. The system is moved, so the host is allowed to buy this strength point." You don't have to force yourself. Actually, I can wait for the lottery. It doesn't cost money. Meg was even more calm now. Chapter 187. System, have you gone mad from being so poor? You're actually forcing me to do something like this. Meg raised his eyebrows as he looked at the golden attribute points that suddenly appeared in his mind. His heartbeat quickened. Sorry, this system doesn't accept complaints, the system replied seriously. It's fine. Maybe one day I won't accept earning money. Meg's tone was even more indifferent than the system's. Host, this system believes that earning money is something that requires a lifetime of persistence and hard work. If a person doesn't earn money, what's the difference between them and a salted fish? There are many difficulties and obstacles on the road to becoming the god of cookery, but as long as you persist in earning money, no matter how many difficulties you face, you can overcome them. After the storm comes the most brilliant rainbow. The system's voice suddenly sounded a little anxious as it encouraged and tempted him. Salted fish. I think it's pretty good. I'm limited to 100 servings a day, and I can take a leave of absence when I'm in a bad mood. Don't you think this kind of life is wonderful? Meg said calmly with the corner of his mouth raised. The price of the next attribute point, 50,000 gold coins. Slaying dragons in the sky, subduing demons in the sea, punching trolls, stepping on demons. As long as you're willing to pay, anything is possible. If you're my brother, then I'm greedy. The system's voice paused. Sorry, I mixed up the words, 50,000 gold coins. System, you're fucking robbing me. Meg almost jumped out of his chair. It wasn't easy for him to save up 10 million gold coins to buy a single attribute point, but he didn't expect the next one to go straight for 5 million gold coins. The key was that this was only the second attribute point. According to this ratio, the third attribute point would be at least 10 million gold coins, and it was very likely that it would be more than that. But I have to admit that slaying dragons in the sky and subduing demons in the sea is really a little tempting. Meg recalled the scene in his memory where he cut off the dragon's head with a sword, and inexplicably felt a little hot-blooded. This goal was slightly more attractive than becoming the god of cookery. Of course, in order to fulfill the promise he made to Amy and become a true god of cookery, Meg was still determined. However, the system had been a little naughty recently. He had to make it face up to its own identity. If he didn't beat it, it would become a troublemaker. After a moment of silence, the system prompted, Host, you can activate the physical fitness package by consciously touching it with your mind. But, before the system could finish its words, Meg's entire body trembled. It was as if an electric current had pierced through his body from his head, and then started to flow crazily through his body. All of his cells were trembling in the electric current, as if they were experiencing a baptism of electricity. A numb feeling spread through his entire body, and even his tongue felt a little tied up. Ah! Yabamiya withdrew her hand from Meg's shoulder and subconsciously took 2 steps back. She looked at Meg in surprise. Her fingers felt a little numb as if something had come out of Meg's body and poked her fingers. Boss, are you okay? Yabamiya looked at Meg with concern. I'm fine. Meg suddenly opened his eyes. His hair stood on end, and he looked like an afro. He turned to look at Yabamiya and nodded. He also looked a little confused. Are you really okay? Yabamiya looked at Meg. She wanted to laugh, but she was also a little worried. She asked hesitantly. Yes, I'm fine. You can go and clean up. I'll go out for a while. Meg nodded and got up to walk out of the door. His hand reached for the door handle, but before he could touch it, there was a thunderous sound. He slammed the door open with a bang. What's wrong with Mr. Mac? Yabamiya still didn't know what happened, but she still obediently started to clean up the restaurant. "System, you fucking did that on purpose." Meg roared in his heart as soon as he stepped out of the door. In that moment, he was electrocuted to the point of doubting life. "Do you think I'm a little naughty, so you need to electrocute me? Do you think you're the king of lightning?" Meg looked at his shadow under the sun and his head that had suddenly become twice as big. The muscles on his face twitched, and he almost laughed out loud in anger. "Host, the system was going to remind you, but your actions were too fast. Before I could finish, you had already triggered it." The system's innocent voice sounded, but no matter how you listened, it sounded like it was gloating. Meg's expression froze. The system did seem to have something to say, but he was too impatient and clicked on it. However, he was still a little annoyed. "But there was no other reaction when I increased it by 0.5 last time. Why did it have to be electrocuted this time?" The host's body has almost reached the limits of a human's body, but it has been eroded by drugs, magic, and curses. Although the system has already done a thorough cleansing, the dormant and shrunken cells need some external stimulation to awaken and reactivate them. Electrocution is the simplest and most effective method. The system explained seriously, as for the first time, because the number of cells needed to be awakened is not many, and they are only on the surface layer, the current passing through is relatively small, so the host did not feel anything. "I see." Meg nodded, reluctantly accepting this explanation, but soon his eyes widened and he exclaimed, "Fuck. System, this is only the second point of physical strength, and I'm already electrocuted. Won't I be struck by lightning in the later stages? This is going to be a fucking tribulation." "The system will try its best to ensure the host's safety," the system said quietly. "Okay, give me some peace and quiet." Meg smiled, but he was already cursing in his heart. Originally, he thought that he could steadily increase his strength by spending money, but he did not expect that things were not as simple as he thought. Although the system would try its best to ensure his safety for the sake of money, when he thought about how he had to be electrocuted every time, and how the electricity would increase gradually, Meg still felt a little disgruntled. If there's not enough electricity, will the system take a chain and fly a hot air balloon into the sky to attract lightning? Meg imagined. Forget it, the image was too beautiful, so it was better not to imagine it. After calming himself down, Meg lowered his head and carefully felt the changes in his body. He slowly clenched his fist, and the feeling of weakness had completely disappeared. Instead, it was replaced by a feeling of strength and power, almost comparable to his previous life. Moreover, perhaps because of the stimulation from the electric shock, his originally skinny body had slightly more muscles. Although he still looked a little thin, he no longer felt as weak as before. Chapter 188. The numbness from the electric shock was fading, and he could feel a powerful feedback when his feet touched the ground. The long-awaited strength made Meg feel relaxed. It was as if a stone that had been pressing on his chest had been removed. He could say goodbye to being a cripple from now on. Although he couldn't go anywhere, he could be a normal stay-at-home dad. The efficiency of cooking should at least be doubled. "I guess I'll have to hire another waiter," Meg murmured to himself as he walked towards the weapons shop in Mumbai. Although he passed by the shop every day, Meg had never entered the weapons shop in Mumbai. The size of the house was about the same as Meg's. The house is in Aden Square and the individual shops were about the same size. They were all built together, but some big shops would have several shops connected. The house was built with a kind of black stone, and it looked like it had been recently repaired. The surface wasn't very smooth, and it was similar to the rough character of the dwarves. A small iron rod poked out of the door. There were 3 thin round iron plates hanging from it, and the words, "Weapons Shop," were written in red handwriting. It looked like it had been written many times, and the handwriting overlapped with each other. It looked very old, and it was a testament to the old dwarven blacksmith's life in Mumbai. There was a wooden door in the weapons shop, but the wooden planks in the direction of the door were all removable. During the day, Mumbai would take them all down and put them aside. The wooden door was also completely open. The faint sound of metal clanking could be heard. Meg was secretly glad that the system had done a good job of soundproofing the restaurant. Otherwise, it would be a torture to listen to the sound of metal clanking every day. Meg stood at the entrance and looked inside. He was greeted by the sight of a place that resembled a weapons exhibition hall. There were all types of weapons hanging on the wall on the right, and there were 2 rows of wooden racks. There was a wall separating the forge inside from the outside, and there was a small opening in the wall. On the other side, there were 4 chairs placed against the wall. The layout appeared to be very simple, and the black stone floor appeared to be quite clean. From big axes to small throwing knives, long swords, short swords, iron rods, heavy swords. As long as it was a mainstream weapon, it could be found on the weapon rack. The bright light outside shone on the weapons, giving them a cold light. One could see the sharpness of the weapons. A weapon that can sell for 1,000 gold coins is indeed extraordinary. Meg's eyes lit up. Although he had played with guns more than cold weapons in his previous life, he still had a good eye for weapons. The weapons shops in Mumbai were filled with clanking noises every night. It was obvious that business was doing well. Weapons were the most important partners of a warrior. The quality of the weapons could determine the outcome of a battle. Therefore, the reputation of an old blacksmith was more useful than any advertisement. The weapons shops in Mumbai were like that. In Chaos City, there were no more than 3 dwarves who could match his skills. As for whose weapons were better, there were many different opinions. The fact that a blacksmith shop could maintain a booming business for decades was enough to prove everything. Meg stepped over the threshold and walked in quietly. Other than the sound of forging, he could also vaguely hear a man's conversation. Meg listened carefully for a while and realized that the people talking were Meg and Haybang. It seemed that Haybang didn't go back home after breakfast. Instead, he stayed at the blacksmith shop in Mumbai. The sound of forging suddenly stopped. Mumbai stuck his head out of the door and called out in surprise, "Mr. Mac. Boss of Mumbai. I was bored, so I came over to take a look. You can continue with your work." Meg replied with a smile. He did come over to take a look. It was a little strange for a restaurant owner to buy weapons. It would make people think in a bad way. "Mr. Mac, are you going to get a weapon to play with too?" Haybang came out from behind and asked Meg with a smile. "I'll just play with the cleaver. I just came over to take a look." Meg shook his head with a smile. Other than taking a look, Meg also wanted to see how heavy a weapon was suitable for him with his current strength. When Meg Alex was in his prime, he used a black heavy sword that weighed 100 kilograms. It could kill a dragon with one strike. Meg's body had recovered, so it wasn't a problem for him to pick up something that weighed 100 kilograms. However, it was a little difficult for him to use a sword that weighed 100 kilograms as a weapon. "System, do you sell weapons?" Meg asked in his heart. The weapons in Mumbai were too expensive. The system doesn't provide weapons that hurt people. The system's solemn voice sounded. "Well, I'll just buy it here," Meg said calmly. "If the host wants to practice his knife skills, it's not impossible to sell it to the host. However, I hope the host can guarantee that the weapon in your hands will be a sword of justice and won't be used to kill people," the system said hesitantly. "I'm buying it to kill people, and I want the kind that can kill people with one strike. If you don't have it, then forget it." Meg curled his lips and said with some sarcasm, "Sword of justice. Do you think you're selling children's toys?" "Host, you've bought children's toys many times. Please don't look down on children's toys." The craftsmanship of children's toys is no worse than that of a weapon. The feelings invested by the creator far exceed that of a cold weapon. Moreover, the price of high-grade toys is much higher than that of a weapon. So, what right do you have to look down on children's toys? The system's solemn voice sounded. Meg thought for a moment and was speechless. Amy's music box cost 200 gold coins. If she were to buy a higher-grade toy, it was possible that the price would surpass that of a weapon. That's right. If Mr. Mac's hands were to hold a sword, it would be a loss. This world can have one less mediocre knight, but it can't have one less Mr. Mac. Haybang nodded in agreement. If it's Meg Alex, then he's not a mediocre knight. Meg thought to himself as he made his way over to a slender long sword that was hanging on the wall. He smiled as he said, "Yes, it's pretty good to be a chef." Mobai, who was wearing a thick black apron, walked out from inside and looked at Meg with a smile. "Mr. Mac, if you want to buy one to play with, I suggest you take the one on the top. It's shorter, and it might be more suitable for you." Meg looked too thin. Previously, when he was cooking, he often had to hold on to the stove to rest. That female sword might be more suitable for him, so he didn't have any disdain for it. Although the sword that Meg wanted to take was slender, it still weighed about 5 kilograms. He was afraid that Meg would twist his hand. Chapter 189. It was a familiar yet unfamiliar feeling. After merging with Mag's and Alex's souls, Mag was sometimes unable to tell whose memories they belonged to. However, he couldn't be bothered to dwell on that, so he simply treated them as his own. In any case, there was no way to separate those memories, and it was as if he had really experienced them, instead of viewing them from a third person's point of view. Another reason was that since he couldn't go back, he might as well integrate himself into this world. At least now he had Amy to protect. He felt a sense of accomplishment when he made all kinds of delicious food and watched the customers enjoy themselves. This world was a new life for him, and he wanted to live it well. He seems to be a good swordsman. Malbai's eyes lit up as he looked at Mag. Over the past few centuries, he had forged no less than 3,000 weapons, and had seen far too many customers. Among them, there were powerful swordsmen, heavy-armored knights who wielded heavy swords, and rookies who were just beginning to make their mark. Among these people, he had seen many powerful swordsmen. Only a few of them could have a mysterious connection with the sword after holding it, and all of them were excellent swordsmen. However, what was strange was that Mag, who wasn't proficient in using swords, felt an inexplicable sense of familiarity with this sword when he held it, as if this sword had been custom-made for him. Is it because he often holds kitchen knives, so he has more experience than ordinary people when holding swords? Malbai thought to himself, and found a suitable answer. "Mr. Mac, is it too heavy?" Haybang asked with concern. He wanted to eat Rigiamo for lunch, and he didn't want Meg to get hurt. "It's okay, but it's a bit heavy." Mag resisted the urge to demonstrate a set of sword techniques as he placed the sword back onto the shelf with a smile on his face. The weight of the sword was just right for him. According to the experience in his mind, his current strength was just right for him to unleash all of the sword techniques that he had come up with in his mind. Of course, his body was still not well nourished, so he could only use the simplest part, but he should be able to defeat a level 1 knight. Knights were the main fighting force of the human race in racial wars, and the Knight Legion was also the most powerful deterrent to the foreign races at the borders of the empire. A knight had to pass the certification of the Knights Guild and obtain the badge of the corresponding rank. Only then would they be recognized. Before that, they would be called a rookie knight. If they failed the certification, they would be called a fallen knight. Of course, in the military camp, knights below LV3 were usually called rookies by veterans. This was a tradition that had been maintained for more than 100 years. It was also a kind of encouragement and supervision for new recruits and young knights. There were several criteria for the recognition of a level 1 knight. First of all, one had to test the Knight's Law, which would be issued by the Knights Guild, and the questions would be set by the Knights Guild. Those who failed to pass would not be able to take the subsequent tests. The next test was strength. The requirement was to be able to lift a 150 kg stone for 10 seconds. The last test was sword techniques. The requirement was to master basic sword techniques and be able to use them in actual combat. These 3 steps gave Meg the same feeling as taking the driver's license test. If he failed the first test, he would not be able to take the subsequent tests. If he failed the second test, he could practice hard behind closed doors, but if he failed the third test, he would have to go on the road. Whether he was a donkey or a horse, he would know when he took it out for a walk. In the past, Meg had vowed to take the test himself, but in the end, he backed his car into the garage and failed 3 times. Later, he directly spent money to buy a license. Later, he would receive a stack of parking tickets every year. Anyway, he just could not stop. Although Meg had returned to his normal body, it would be difficult for him to lift a 150 kg stone for 10 seconds. However, the sword techniques in his head and countless combat experiences were enough to make up for the lack of strength. In actual combat, strength could not determine victory or defeat. Flexibility and sword techniques could change the outcome. After testing the weight, Meg did not continue to stay on the weapon. He turned to Haebang and curiously asked, "Is Haga not back yet? We just received the news last night. The tribal war is over. Our tribe won a great victory under the leadership of my brother. We killed and captured all the enemies, and regained control of the gold mine. My brother is fine, just a little injury on his hand. He will come back to Chaos City in a few days," Haebang said with a smile. He seemed to be in a good mood. "That's good." Meg nodded with a smile. He had a good impression of Haga, the silent big man. He was a little worried about his safety, but he was relieved to hear that he was fine. Amy had even mentioned him once a few days ago. "Then you guys talk." "I have to go see a friend," Haebang said, and walked straight out the door. "Mr. Mac, you like swords?" Malbai asked with a smile as he walked up to Meg. Meg had said that the sword was too heavy, but he felt that it was just right, which made him feel a little strange. Every man should have a dream of being a knight. "Before I picked up a cleaver, I had that dream too," Meg said with a smile. Walking forward, his gaze swept across the weapons on the weapon rack. In the end, his gaze landed on a somewhat messy sketch on a small table at the innermost part of the room. There was a ball-shaped object drawn on it. It could be considered a cross-sectional view. It was filled with all kinds of things, and there were scribbled words on the side: sulfur, charcoal, saltpeter. "This is..." Meg raised his eyebrows. This thing was incredible. Malbai walked up with a wry smile, and said, "Mr. Mac, this is the thing I told you about last time that can release a huge amount of energy. But until now, I still haven't figured out how to maximize its effect. This thing has to be used safely. It's not a joke when it explodes." Meg swallowed his saliva. This feeling was like suddenly finding out that the uncle next door was studying bombs at home every day, and his head was filled with thoughts of creating big news. If he wasn't careful, he would be taken to the sky. "Yes, but I still feel that the power is still lacking. The giant dragon's skin is thick, and it's not that easy to kill it. Also, how to get this thing to the side of the giant dragon is the problem I want to solve the most now." Malbai frowned deeply. He seemed to have aged a lot all of a sudden, and fell into deep thought. "Think about it slowly. I'll go back to prepare the ingredients first." Meg immediately slipped away. He didn't know where Malbai got the gunpowder formula, and he felt that it wasn't powerful enough. Although he sympathized with Mobai's father being killed by the giant dragon, Meg still didn't want to bring this world into the era of firearms so quickly. "System, how much for a sword of that weight just now?" Meg asked in his heart as he left the weapon shop. 1,000 gold coins for one sword, quality guaranteed. Honest to all. The system's voice sounded. Chapter 190. The system abides by the basic principles of business competition, and will never undercut the market price. This is detrimental to the healthy and orderly development of the market, the system replied with a serious expression. Very good. I admire your magnanimity. Meg nodded before turning around. That's why I'm choosing theirs. However, I feel like timely promotions are beneficial to the healthy development of the market. They can increase the purchasing desire of customers, and at the same time, they can remind the workers to better serve their customers. The system's urgent voice sounded. How much? Meg stopped in his tracks. The system gritted its teeth. Meg immediately turned to leave. The system's voice immediately became a lot louder. Meg still had no intention of stopping. 10% off. Low price. The system said with difficulty. 10% off. I'll buy it when I have the money. Meg turned around and walked toward his restaurant. He had just bought his strength points, and he had less than 100 gold coins left. Even with a 10% discount, he still couldn't afford it. Yabamiya was wiping the table when he entered the restaurant. She hurriedly greeted Meg, and she was struck by the urge to laugh at the sight of Meg's completely unkempt hair, but she forced herself to repress the urge with a peculiar expression. What was even more peculiar to her was that Meg seemed to have changed. It wasn't just his unkempt hair, but his mind and body were also slightly different. The exhaustion on his face had completely disappeared, and his black eyes were deep and full of spirit. It was as if one would be drawn into them with just a single glance. Meg also knew that his hairstyle was a little outrageous, so he nodded at Yabamiya before preparing to go upstairs to wash his hair. When he reached the counter, Ugly Duckling, which was sleeping in the basket, suddenly woke up. It got up and looked around. It was a little above the ground, and it stared at Meg with a pair of blue eyes as it meowed for help. Are you still a cat? Why are you so scared at such a small height? Meg pursed his lips. He looked at the counter, which was about 30 centimeters away from the basket and 40 centimeters tall. He looked at Ugly Duckling and said, "Jump onto the counter, and I'll carry you down." Meow. Ugly Duckling looked up at the counter before shaking its head at Meg with an innocent expression. Then you can stay in the basket. Meg had no intention of negotiating. Ugly Duckling spent most of its time with Amy, so he wanted it to be bolder. Perhaps it would be able to protect Amy at times. Meg was still not sure what this oviparous cat was, but it was best not to raise it as a fat orange cat. Meow. Ugly Duckling mustered its courage again, and looked at the counter with a serious expression. It slowly curled up in the basket, and then leaped toward the counter. Paw! Ugly Duckling's jumping ability was about 10 centimeters worse than he had expected. It crashed into the door of the cupboard, and then slowly slid to the ground with its face pressed against the cupboard. Its slightly deformed face was still pressed against the cupboard, and its eyes were lifeless, as if it were doubting its life as a cat. Well, look, didn't you come down by yourself? However, I still need to work hard. Meg nodded seriously. Ugly Duckling silently raised its two little paws to cover its ears. Meg shrugged, and went upstairs to wash his hair and take a shower. After taking a bath and changing into a new set of chef's robes, Meg's entire body was refreshed. His mental state and powerful body made him feel as if his beautiful life had just begun. Everything had become more beautiful in his eyes. There were no customers in the restaurant, and it was very quiet after Yabamiya cleaned it up. A ray of sunlight shone in through the half-closed door, and Ugly Duckling was lying at the door, basking in the sun. It rolled from left to right, and then from right to left, looking at the door from time to time as if it were waiting for Amy to come back. Yabamiya was also sitting at a table in front of the window, looking at the Aiden square with its chin in its hands, thinking about something. "Mia, if you want to learn how to dance, then go ahead. We don't have any customers here anyway," Meg said with a smile as he bent over to take out the music box from the counter, and gently placed it on the table. Yabamiya's eyes lit up upon hearing the sound, and she waved her hands in embarrassment. "And no need, boss. I've opened it for you. You can move the table yourself, and I'll go prepare the ingredients. I'll be very busy this afternoon." Meg smiled as he opened the Gokuraku Jodo app, and walked into the kitchen. He was going to complete the 1,000 customers mission this afternoon, and he should be able to get the braised chicken recipe as a reward after completing the mission. Meg was looking forward to it. He hadn't had a proper meal of white rice since he came here, and he was sure that Amy would like it very much. After adding 0.5 strength, Mag felt that he had been sublimated. Kneading dough, which used to be very strenuous, suddenly became much easier. After getting used to it, his efficiency rose sharply. The dough that used to take more than an hour to knead was finished in less than half an hour. He didn't feel tired at all, so he needed 2 more bowls. He could make more rujiamo for lunch today. Meg looked up at Yabamiya, who was a little clumsy, but was working very hard to learn how to dance. He couldn't help but shake his head with a smile. He put down the dough in his hand, and murmured to himself, "If my efficiency is doubled, my business will be doubled. I need to hire another waitress. Mia can't handle it all by herself, and she'll make mistakes easily." In an alley near Gaia Hotel, an old elf was observing Sally, who was hanging a quilt on a bamboo pole at the entrance of the hotel with a crystal prism in his hand. Half of his blonde hair had turned white, but his eyes were deep and wise. "Lord Ingve, is she Miss Sally?" Erwin asked in a low voice. He couldn't suppress his excitement. Finding Sally was his main contribution, and the high reward and the transfer back to the Wind Forest could help him reach the pinnacle of his life. "Yes, she's Miss Sally. I saw her at the party 2 years ago." Ingve looked at Sally, who was walking back to the hotel. He put away the crystal prism in his hand and nodded calmly. "Then why is she working as a waitress in this small hotel?" Erwin's tone was still humble, but he was really confused. After running into Sally at Amy's yesterday, he followed her all the way to this small hotel. He thought she was staying here temporarily to avoid being tracked, but he didn't expect that she was working as a waitress here. A noblewoman who was nominated to be the crown princess of the Elven Queen was working as a waitress in a small hotel owned by a human woman. It was unbelievable that she would do things like cleaning rooms and drying quilts. "Only you and I know about this. Do you understand?" Ingve looked into Erwin's eyes and said with a hint of warning. "Yes." Erwin hurriedly lowered his head. Ingve was the Elven ambassador in Chaos City. He was a powerful 7th-tier magic caster, and was in charge of all the Elven affairs in Chaos City. He hesitated for a moment, and then asked, "But Lord Ingve, should we take Miss Sally back now?" 4th update. After today's update, I'm going to promote a new book. Of course, I'm going to promote the most shameless self-promotion. I personally think that this book is quite good. There are some things that I can't write anymore. To put it nicely, it's just that I'm constantly improving, Diao. Well, it's just that I'm constantly improving, Diao. TL note, Diao. TL note, Diao, there was a general description, a carefree and unrestrained head of the Secret Service, a sharp-tongued and crippled disciple of a godly thief, a penniless and willful young master of a bank, a shy and honest young Go player, a beautiful unproud princess, a clean and smiling young killer. In this martial world, in this imperial court, there was never a dull moment. Let's just treat it as a wuxia story. Well, it's mainly because this book hasn't been subscribed to more than 100 copies. It's always been my obsession. Chapter 191. Another boring day. On the edge of the roof, Sally swung her slender legs and rested her hands on both sides. She looked up at the sky. Her slim white dress outlined her alluring curves. She stared at the two birds flying slowly in the sky until they disappeared from her sight. Grumble, her stomach growled. Sally's eyes went blank. She reached out to touch her flat belly and murmured to herself, I want to eat sweet tofu pudding and Yangzhou fried rice. Dreams don't exist, take her back. Ingve looked at Erwin with a sarcastic smile. Are you sure you want to attack a 7th-level magic caster, and a future elf queen who will probably become the crown prince after returning to the Wind Forest? I wouldn't dare. Erwin's expression changed immediately. His mind was full of rewards, and he didn't think about anything else. Now that he heard Ingve's words, his back was soaked with cold sweat. He had almost stepped into a bottomless abyss. He was only a 4th-level magic caster, and Ingve was only a 7th-level magic caster. They didn't even know if they could defeat Sally, let alone take her back unharmed. Of course, more importantly, if she really became the new elf princess after returning to the Wind Forest, her status would only be below the queen and Princess Irina. Erwin wouldn't dare to attack her even if he had 10 times the courage. Then, should we report it? Erwin said hesitantly, and even his voice lowered a lot. Come back with me later, and I'll give you the reward of 5,000 gold coins. You can return to the Wind Forest next month. Haven't you always wanted to get a position in the finance department? Go home and wait for the news. Ingve nodded expressionlessly. Thank you, Mr. Ingve. Erwin's face lit up, and he hurried to express his gratitude. Although he didn't know why Ingve would give him the reward in advance, he knew better than to ask. Ingve was not a very powerful magic caster among the elves, but he had the powerful Billy family behind him. The Billy family was almost in charge of the finances of the elves. Just like Miss Sally's Brewster family, which was in charge of food, the Billy family was one of the most powerful families among the elves. Furthermore, it had been rumored since last year that the 3rd young master of the Billy family, Blower, was going to be engaged to young Mistress Sally of the Brewster family. However, before the marriage was settled, Miss Sally ran away from home. This news was concealed by the Brewster family. Soon after, Lady Helena proposed to the Queen that Sally should be the new crown princess. Only then did the news of Princess Sally running away from home become known to the elves. Sally, who had always been overshadowed by Princess Irina, suddenly became the new favorite of the elves. The Brewster family, which had been facing a crisis, also received help from all sides, and successfully survived the crisis. The marriage between Sally and the Billy family also became a miraculous event. Many people speculated that Sally's running away from the Leaf family was a direct protest against the marriage. No one could force a future empress to marry anyone, not even her father. The elves' long lifespans meant that they had more time to find a suitable partner. This could take 100 years or even 200 years, so there was no rush. Many people were gloating over the Billy family's misfortune. If they had been able to marry Sally last year, the Billy family would have become the most powerful family in the elven race. However, as long as the elders of the Brewster family weren't out of their minds, they definitely wouldn't urge Sally to get married. If she didn't get married, she would still be a member of the Brewster family. Erwin wasn't stupid, and he knew what was going on. However, he was just a small fry, and he couldn't get involved in the matters between two major families. However, since Ingve had offered him a position in the finance department, he had no choice but to keep his mouth shut. Let's go. Ingve took one last look at the roof before turning around. In a study in the Elven embassy, Ingve looked on as Erwin excitedly left with a heavy box. His brows furrowed, but they quickly smoothed out. He raised a hand, and a gust of wind blew past, and the door was gently closed. The Brewster family isn't very honest. Young master, this is all I can do for you. Ingve sat down in front of his desk, picked up a quill, and began to write a letter. After pressing the last dough to the side, Meg looked at the hundreds of dough that were spread out beside him, and a smile appeared on his face. Although his arms were a little sore, compared to before, he had to rest after rubbing for a while. Today's speed was very impressive, and the quantity had almost doubled. Next, it's time to make the tofu pudding. Meg turned his gaze to the juicer beside him. The juicer had a diameter of 30 centimeters and a height of 60 centimeters, and it could squeeze out enough soy milk for a pot of tofu pudding at once. After soaking in the juicer for more than 8 hours, the soybeans became plump and glossy. The demand for tofu pudding seems to be getting higher and higher. It's good for the restaurant's development to have some limited edition dishes. Seeing the soybeans being crushed in the juicer and the white soy milk flowing everywhere, Meg's eyes suddenly lit up. System, what do you think of the matter we discussed yesterday? He asked in his mind. Why don't you remove the thank you column from the wheel? The system believes that all the lucky draws should have a certain probability of no prizes. Only then will the lucky draw become interesting. Otherwise, it would be better to call it 1 out of 5. What kind of lucky draw is that? The system replied. Hee hee. Meg pursed his lips. Host, please don't express disdain for the system's genius idea. The system will ensure that the lucky draw is absolutely fair. If the host's luck is off the charts, you might be able to draw a strength point, the system said solemnly. System, let me ask you. Who designed the wheel? The system. Who controls the wheel? The system. Who gave the prize? The system. Then when I want to spin, do you still have the final say in which column I fall into? Are you going to tell me that I'm unlucky if I fall into the thank you column? Would you believe me if I said that? Meg's smile was a little mocking. The system fell silent for a moment. After a while, it said solemnly, the system guarantees. Chapter 192. The system fell into silence. After a long while, it said, You're embarrassing me. I'll pay for the wheel myself, Meg said calmly. Deal. Crazy wheel, 3 gold coins for 1. The system's voice suddenly became cheerful. I say, ding. Pre-order successful. Ding. Payment successful. Ding. Ordering in progress. You win. Meg raised an eyebrow as he listened to the system's cheerful triple payment. However, 3 gold coins were nothing compared to the reward. It seemed that he would have to be more careful when talking to the system in the future. This guy's nose for money was even more sensitive than a dog's. The reward was set by the system. Although he was already ordering the wheel, it probably wasn't going to tell him what the reward was before he completed the mission. Meg calmed himself down and began to make the tofu pudding seriously when he heard the notification that the soy milk was ready. Big Sister Luo Xia, is what you said true? Can the tofu pudding really remove the black spot on my face? In one of the carriages, a young girl wearing a long black dress, a black cloak that covered her entire body, and a black veil hat on her head asked in a somewhat nervous yet somewhat expectant voice. Her voice was clear and pleasing to the ear like glass. Her light golden curly hair almost reached the ground, and the black veil covered her face. Even though she was in the carriage, the veil only parted a little, revealing a pair of light purple eyes, which were like the purple clouds when the sun just came out in the morning. She looked at Luo Xia, who was sitting opposite her, with hope in her eyes. Of course it's true. Gloria, you're so beautiful, but you have to wrap yourself up like this every time you go out. My heart aches when I see you like this. If you remove the veil, all the men in Chaos City will go crazy for you. Luo Xia looked at the girl with pity. She gently held the girl's hand, which was so white that her veins could be seen. It will scare people. Gloria lowered her eyes, and her voice was a little sad. She unconsciously wrapped the veil tighter around her face, and even covered her eyes. It won't. Trust me, this thing I brought you here to eat can really remove that black spot. You won't have to wear a veil out in the future. Luo Xia's hand tightened, and she reached out to roll up her clothes a few times, revealing the scary scar on her forearm. She smiled and said, "Look, I've only eaten 2 servings of tofu pudding, and a quarter of the scar has disappeared. The new skin is no different from normal skin. It's really smaller." Gloria couldn't help but exclaim as she looked at Luo Xia's arm, and her eyes lit up with hope. "Father, school's over." At around 11:15 a.m., Amy's voice sounded from outside the door. Ugly Duckling, who was sleeping outside the door out of boredom, immediately got up and began to meow excitedly at the door. "Ugly, ugly Duckling." Amy's voice came from the other side of the door, and Ugly Duckling immediately cowered. It turned around and cried into the kitchen. "Take it out and get ready to eat." Meg put the Yangzhou fried rice on a plate and said goodbye to Yabamiya. He took off his apron and walked to the door with a big smile on his face. Ding-ling. "Father." The bell rang, and Meg opened the door. Amy rushed in immediately. Meg hurriedly squatted down and hugged her. He twirled her around with a smile, lifted her up high, and then gently put her down. "It's so fun, Father. Lift me up high, lift me up high." Amy laughed happily. It felt like she was flying in the sky, and it was the first time her father had lifted her up so high. "Okay," Meg replied with a smile. Looking at the smile on her face, he was in a good mood. After his body returned to normal, the most obvious reaction was that lifting Amy up was no problem for him at all. Let alone once, even 10 or 100 times wouldn't be a problem. Ugly Duckling circled Meg on the ground and meowed, trying to attract his attention. "Sigh, I see Mr. Mac showing off his daughter every day, and now he's trying to trick me into having a daughter." Harrison sighed. After a while, he turned around in confusion and didn't hear a reply. "I'm so jealous that I'm twisted." George's expression was a little exaggerated. "Don't worry, big brother. If this one isn't yours, you and sister-in-law can work together. Maybe you'll have a daughter next time." "Yeah, and if you really want to raise a daughter, you don't have to care about what sister-in-law gives birth to. Just raise her as if she were your daughter." The group of friends behind him also suggested ideas. It was rare that all 6 of them were here today, and they stood in the sweet party line, which was quite eye-catching. All of the customers in the line were smiling at the sight of Mag and Amy playing with each other. Many of the young ladies in the line were already yearning for Mag's outstanding cooking skills, handsome and rich, and doting on his daughter in such a fancy way. "If I marry Mr. Mac, then I can eat unlimited tofu pudding, Yangzhou fried rice, rujiamo, and..." A 13 or 14-year-old girl clasped her hands in front of her heart and looked at Meg's side profile with a mesmerized expression. "Damn girl, how old are you and you're already yearning for love? If you continue to fantasize, I'll break your legs." The fat woman standing in front of her turned around and flicked the young girl's forehead as a warning. "Ouch! That hurts." The girl covered her forehead and took 2 steps back, tears welling up in her eyes. But when she looked at the fat woman, she immediately cowered and pursed her lips in grievance. The guests standing at the side all showed kind smiles on their faces. That girl's words had spoken the thoughts of many women, but only a young girl like her who had just awakened to love would dare to say it out loud. The line was automatically divided into two groups. Julian was already standing at the front of the savory party line, while the sweet party line's first spot was empty. Even the earliest ones didn't dare to sit in the first row. "Little guy, you ran too fast." Crassus walked over with his magician's staff. He was panting slightly. It seemed that catching up with Amy had taken a toll on him. "Thank you for bringing Amy back," Meg said gratefully to Crassus as he put Amy on the ground. Chapter 193. We're of the same age. You'll know who's better if you look at yourself. Crassus naturally stood at the front of the sweet party. He took a look at Julian, and his aura was no weaker than his. The two of them faced each other head-on, and the terrifying aura between them reappeared. The sweet party, whose aura was slightly weaker, suddenly regained their confidence. They didn't care that Crassus was late, but he still stood at the front. This was their leader, and only he dared to stand in that position. "Gloria, he's the owner of this restaurant. His culinary skills are superb. I've never eaten anything so delicious before. Try something else apart from the tofu pudding later. I think the Yangzhou fried rice will suit your taste," Luo Xia said with a smile. "I don't have a big appetite. I can't eat much." Gloria shook her head slightly, but her eyes under the black veil were fixed on Meg. The smile on this man's face when he held up the half-elf girl was so warm. She remembered that her father used to hold her like this when she was young. However, ever since that black mark appeared on her face, she didn't want to go out or meet people. Even when she met her father, she would cover her face with a scarf. Her father was still gentle, but he seemed to be getting more and more distant from her. She hadn't seen that smile on the man's face for a long time. "I'm so envious of that little girl," Gloria thought to herself as she looked at Amy, who was squatting at the door and stroking the head of an orange kitten. "That's what I said before I entered this restaurant," Luo Xia said with a smile. However, she didn't rush to persuade them. Nothing was more persuasive than smelling the aroma of food and seeing others enjoying it. "We'll open in a dozen minutes. Please wait for a moment." Meg had no intention of participating in the battle between the sweet and savory parties. He smiled at the customers and gestured for Amy, who was squatting on the ground and playing with the kitten, to come in. "Goodbye, Master Halfbeard and Master Turtle," Amy said to Crassus and Urian. She picked up Ugly Duckling with a smile, and asked, "Ugly Duckling, were you super bored when I wasn't home?" "Meow," Ugly Duckling nodded. It was clearly a lot more excited to see Amy. Could it be that this little fellow has an M attribute? Meg closed the door gently and looked at Ugly Duckling with raised eyebrows. "Father, is Ugly Duckling good at home?" Amy asked as she looked at Meg. Meg nodded with a smile as he looked at Ugly Duckling, which was looking at him with puppy eyes. Amy looked at Ugly Duckling with satisfaction, and nodded as she said, "All right, seeing as father said you're a good girl, I'll let you have 2 bowls of tofu pudding for lunch today, and you don't have to run after that." "Meow meow cat," Ugly Duckling called with elation as it rubbed against Amy's little hand and licked her fingers. "But you can't get fat." "If you get fat, I won't be able to carry you," Amy warned with a serious expression. "Meow cat," Ugly Duckling nodded with a sincere expression. "Have 2 small bowls." Meg took a look at Ugly Duckling, who was looking at the food on the table with anticipation in its eyes. If he let Ugly Duckling eat, it probably wouldn't even be able to carry it in a few months. The fat of an orange cat couldn't be underestimated. Ugly Duckling was most likely only able to understand 2 bowls. However, Mag was only referring to small bowls. If it were the large bowls sold in restaurants, then Ugly Duckling would most likely be overdosed after 2 bowls. However, it would be fine if it used its own 2 shallow bowls. He went in and scooped 2 small bowls of tofu pudding for Ugly Duckling, 1 sweet and 1 salty. He then took a small plate of Yangzhou fried rice from the plate, and chopped up a piece of lean braised meat before putting it on top. Sigh, it's worse than a cat. Outside the restaurant, some customers looked through the glass window at Ugly Duckling, who was enjoying 2 bowls of tofu pudding, and couldn't help but sigh inwardly. Mia, you can stand behind the counter and finish your rujiamo before coming out. Next time, remember to draw the curtains half an hour earlier. Meg smiled as he looked at Yabamiya, who was hesitating with a rujiamo in her hand. Yes, okay. Mia nodded, and immediately walked behind the counter with the rujiamo. Only then did she take a bite of the rujiamo in her hand, and a faint blush appeared on her cheeks. A golden dragon tail also darted out of her dress and swept around on the floor. Ugly Duckling, which was lying on its stomach beside the counter, suddenly raised its head and looked at Yabamiya's dragon tail with hostility. However, after looking at the tofu pudding and meat in front of it, it hesitated for a moment, and decided to continue eating in the end. Father, big sister Mia's tail is so cute, why doesn't she want others to see it? Amy asked as she looked at Meg with a puzzled expression. That's her choice, and we should respect it. Meg looked at Amy with a smile, and then at the long line of customers outside the restaurant, and asked, Amy, do you want to eat now or later? Amy thought for a moment and said, I want to wait a little longer. I think it's so funny when they watch me eat. Okay, then we'll eat later. Meg nodded with a smile. Amy's live food broadcast could indeed increase the chances of first-time customers ordering. It was so delicious that it was more effective than any advertisement. Did you encounter anything interesting on your first day of class? Did you learn a new spell? Meg asked curiously as he took a bite of fried rice. No, Master Halfbeard said he would start with the theory first, and teach me magic tomorrow. Amy shook her head with a hint of disappointment, but her eyes soon lit up again. But I went to play with Daphne after class, and I had so much fun. Okay, then be a good girl in class, and remember what Master taught you. Have fun when you're playing. That's what learning is. Meg reached out and patted Amy's head with a smile. As expected, it was so simple to make children happy. Okay, I will. Amy nodded earnestly. After lunch, Meg brought Amy 2 bowls of tofu pudding and a rujiamo. It was just about time for the restaurant to open, so he walked to the door and opened it with a smile. Welcome, everyone. The argument about the salty and sweet food immediately died down. Crassus and Julian walked up the stairs side by side, and said almost at the same time, a sweet/savory tofu pudding. They glared at each other and then ordered their own food. The customers filed in, and many of them imitated Crassus and Julian. However, when it was time for Harrison and the others to enter, the sweet party crushed them. 6 people entered one after another, and the savory party couldn't squeeze in from the side. Chapter 194. Even though she was wrapped in a black cloak, her body was still curvaceous. From Meg's experience, he could give her a 9 out of 10 for her figure. There were only 2 reasons why a woman would wrap herself up like this. The first one was that she was extremely beautiful and didn't want to attract too much attention. Of course, if that was the case, she would be more conspicuous. Now that more than half of the people in the restaurant were looking at her, covering herself up would arouse people's curiosity. The second possibility was that she was ugly and didn't want to be judged by others. Meg noticed Luo Xia behind her. Yesterday, she had offered to buy a second plate of Yangzhou fried rice at 10 times the price, which had left a deep impression on him. It seemed that the two of them had come together. It wasn't hard to guess the result. However, Meg didn't look away immediately. He was still looking at the girl in the black cloak with a faint smile on his face, just like how he looked at the other customers. Is he encouraging me? Gloria quickly retracted her gaze and lowered her head. She didn't dare to look at Mag again. She could feel her face blushing. Ever since she understood the difference between men and women, she had never stared at a man like that. I hope this girl can take off her hat and cloak one day after eating the tofu pudding. Meg thought to himself. He also looked away and signaled Yabamiya to continue serving the customers. He walked to the kitchen, put on the apron hanging on the side, and started to wash his hands and cook. Gloria raised her head again and walked into the restaurant with the other customers. She looked at the kitchen and clenched her fists slowly. No expression could be seen on her face, which was covered by the black veil. She couldn't help but sniff the aroma in the air. There was the aroma of beans, meat, and eggs. Common ingredients, but the aroma was so unique and even a little tempting. Gloria, let's sit here. Luo Xia smiled and pointed at a corner. Okay. Gloria nodded slightly and followed Luo Xia to the corner. The business of this restaurant is very good. We may have to share a table with other guests later. But don't worry, all the guests will choose to enjoy the delicious food in this restaurant. Luo Xia sat down and said softly. Yes, Gloria nodded slightly, but her eyes under the veil were filled with curiosity as she looked around the restaurant. She rarely ate outside. Even if she had a family dinner, it was in a completely independent private room. She had never eaten in the same restaurant with so many people. Luo Xia was her cousin. Luo Xia had watched her grow up. She knew that she was alone at home and had no friends. Luo Xia often came to chat with her, telling her about the outside world and some interesting things. Luo Xia also encouraged her with her scars.
So today, when Luo Xia said that she had found a way to remove the black spot on her face, she believed it very much. Although she still found it hard to believe that a dish could remove the black spot that had made all the famous doctors and magicians helpless, as long as there was a glimmer of hope to remove the mask, she wanted to try. She didn't want this kind of life to continue. Welcome, what would you like to order? Yabamiya walked over and looked at them with a smile. Although he was a little curious about Gloria, he didn't show it on his face at all. The smile on his face was sincere and full of vitality. Please wait a moment. Luo Xia and Yabamiya nodded. Then Luo Xia opened the menu on the table and put it in front of Gloria, saying, "What do you want to eat?" "I think the salty tofu pudding is also delicious." Gloria looked at the menu and was a little surprised by the price. Although she didn't go out often, she had read a lot of books when she was bored at home, so she had a basic understanding of the price. 600 copper coins was enough to order a table of dishes in an ordinary restaurant, but here, it was only enough to order a plate of Yangzhou fried rice. However, thinking of Luo Xia's comment on the magical tofu pudding, if it was really effective, 200 copper coins per plate was actually very cheap. In these years, her family had spent more than 10,000 gold coins to find medicine for her, but there was no effect at all. After hesitating for a while, Gloria said softly, "A sweet tofu pudding, please. And a savory tofu pudding and 2 plates of Yangzhou fried rice, please," Luo Xia said. "Okay, please wait a moment." Yabamiya nodded and walked to the next table. "Sister Luo Xia, can you eat that much?" Gloria looked at Luo Xia with a little doubt. "1 plate is for you," Luo Xia said with a smile. At the same time, she gestured to the direction where Amy was sitting and said, "You can watch Mr. Mac's daughter eat first. The taste doesn't lie." Gloria followed his gaze, only to find that Amy was sitting at the table in front of the counter. There were 2 big bowls in front of her, and she was holding a biscuit in a paper bag in her hand. It was so small, but it looked like she was going to eat everything in front of her. The contrast was a little adorable. Gloria watched Amy put a spoonful of the white and tender thing into her mouth, and then take a big bite of the big cake with both hands. She was eating so happily that even Gloria couldn't help but swallow her saliva. She was eating so happily. Of course, she was not the only one who was swallowing saliva. The customers who were waiting for their food and had to wait in line for a while all focused their attention on Amy. They swallowed their saliva as they watched her eat. The more they watched, the hungrier they became. For a moment, the restaurant was filled with the sound of rumbling stomachs. Fortunately, Yabamiya soon began to serve the dishes.
She carried the tray with one hand and accurately placed the tofu pudding and rujiamo in front of the customers. She was very efficient. The fragrance of beans and braised meat filled the air and went straight into the nose. It smells so good. Gloria's eyes lit up. She usually only ate half a bowl of food and would eat some fresh fruit after a meal. She didn't eat meat at all. She didn't have any favorite food. However, when she smelled the fragrance of the braised meat floating in the air, she had a slight urge to eat meat. The customer at the table next to her was holding a rujiamo. Gloria finally saw that it was not an ordinary cake, but a big white one stuffed with meat. The two women sat down at their table. There were no more empty seats in the restaurant. Although Gloria was not used to sharing a table with strangers, it was much better than sitting next to the devil at the table next to her. Chapter 195. Thank you. Gloria nodded slightly. Looking at the smile on Yabamiya's face, she felt a lot better. She was a half-dragon who was easily discriminated against, but why was her smile so bright and full of hope? It was so bright that Gloria was a little dazed. You're welcome, Yabamiya replied with a smile. She carried the tray to the next table with a smile. Dig in. It tastes best fresh out of the pot. Roxia looked at Gloria with a smile. She could feel that Gloria's state of mind had changed a little. Although it was just a touch, it should be a good thing for her. It was not a good thing for a young girl who had just turned 18 to have the mental state of an old man who was about to die. Removing the freckles was an important matter, and it was even more important for her to arrange her life and future after removing the freckles. Roxia scooped up a spoonful of savory tofu pudding and put it into her mouth. She couldn't help but close her eyes. The smooth tofu pudding melted in her mouth, and a joyful smile appeared on her face. Since she could only have one serving per meal, she had to enjoy such a delicious meal. Gloria looked at Roxia's expression, and then looked down at the white porcelain bowl in front of her. The delicate white color was countless times better than the coarse pottery in the market. Even her family only had a set of tableware from Rodu that could be compared to this. That was her father's favorite set of tableware. He would only use it when distinguished guests arrived. Last year, her brother broke one of the tableware, and was punished to kneel for over an hour. After that, her father was so angry that he didn't speak to her brother for several days. Yet, such a high-quality set of tableware was only used to hold dishes in this restaurant. However, such a large piece of crystal could be used as the wall, and a beautiful chandelier was carved out of crystal. The tables and chairs were made of the same wood, and even the patterns were very similar. There were exquisite murals on the walls. Only such tableware could match such a restaurant. In that case, was the food here really worthy of the restaurant standard? Did it really have the magical effect that Sister Luoxia said? Gloria picked up the spoon and looked at the tofu pudding in the bowl, which had been drenched in a layer of reddish golden syrup. The sweetness of the tofu pudding was intermingled with the aroma of the beans, and it was as if a layer of gold had been inlaid onto the flawless white jade. It was translucent and free, but also extremely intricate. The spoon cut into the tofu pudding without any resistance. He scooped up a spoonful, and the reddish-golden syrup flowed down the white and tender incision. The syrup was trembling slightly in the spoon, and it looked very tender and bouncy. After a moment of hesitation, Gloria lifted a corner of her veil with her left hand and sucked the tofu pudding into her mouth. She didn't reveal her face at all. The tender tofu pudding melted in her mouth, and the syrup and tofu pudding merged together perfectly. The sweetness exploded in her mouth, and her taste buds were instantly stimulated. It's so sweet. It's as if I've fallen into a honey pot. The flavor of the honey is mixed with the faint aroma of the beans, and the tofu pudding is as tender as water. How can soybeans be so delicious? I can't even taste any dregs. Gloria's eyes lit up immediately. She had never tasted such delicious food before, and it had almost completely overturned her imagination of soybeans. Delicious. It's so delicious. That was the only thought left in Gloria's mind. She scooped up another spoonful of the tofu pudding and put it into her mouth. The sweetness filled her mouth, and she couldn't stop eating. Her face, which had always been as cold as water, was filled with happiness and joy at this moment. This was her respect for the delicious food, and she enjoyed it from the bottom of her heart. Now, Gloria felt that this delicious tofu pudding was worth the trip, even if it didn't have the freckle removal effect. This was the first time she had felt pleasure from food, and she hadn't smiled for many years. At this moment, she felt that she couldn't control her smile. It was a kind of joy and satisfaction that rose from the bottom of her heart, as if she had seen the new meaning of life. Even if it was just for this delicious food, she had to live a better life. Roxia looked at Gloria, who didn't stop eating, and a smile appeared on her face. She ate her tofu pudding unhurriedly. Phew, the spoon made a soft sound in the bowl. Gloria heaved a sigh of relief. She looked up at Roxia, who was sitting opposite her, and asked, "Sister Roxia, can I have another bowl of tofu pudding? Although I would like to satisfy your request, each person can only order one tofu pudding per meal in this restaurant. Even the Supreme Magic Caster treats everyone the same. Yesterday, I offered 10 times the price for a second tofu pudding, but Mr. Mac rejected me without hesitation." Roxia shook her head helplessly. She looked back at Amy, who had just finished her second tofu pudding, and smiled enviously. In this restaurant, only she can have 2 tofu pudding. He rejected both the Supreme Magic Caster and 10 times the price. Gloria looked in the direction of the kitchen with surprise. The owner of this restaurant seemed to be a very special person. At this moment, she suddenly felt a cool sensation coming from the freckle on the left side of her face. It was as if a piece of ice had been put on it. The cool and refreshing feeling was so clear that she opened her mouth in surprise. Is it really effective? Gloria opened her eyes wide. She raised her left hand, which was trembling because of excitement, and touched her cheek gently. It felt cool, but she wasn't sure if the color had faded. She couldn't help but want to go home and take a look at her face in the mirror. "Do you feel cold?" Roxia asked softly. Her eyes lit up when she saw Gloria's reaction. "Yes." Gloria nodded hard. She sounded a little excited. "Don't worry. The tofu pudding is working. This feeling will last for about 10 minutes. Let's go back after we finish the Yangzhou fried rice." Roxia reached out and held Gloria's hand gently. Gloria's hands and chest also felt cool. According to her experience in the past 2 days, her skin was recovering. "Okay." Gloria looked into Roxia's eyes and tried to calm herself down. However, when she thought that there was finally hope to get rid of the nightmare that had haunted her for more than 10 years, she couldn't help but feel her heart beating wildly. "Here's your Yangzhou fried rice." Yabamiya came over with 2 plates of Yangzhou fried rice and placed them gently in front of them. She also took away the 2 porcelain bowls that they had finished. Chapter 197. This sweet tofu pudding is so delicious. Waitress, please give me another helping. A middle-aged man dressed like a businessman said to Yabamiya as he put down the bowl in his hand. The customers nearby all looked at the businessman with smiles on their faces. Everyone wanted to do something like that, but Meg had proven himself the day before that even a great magic caster couldn't make him bow his head. Even 10 times the price wouldn't tempt him. The pain of not being able to have another helping of delicious food was inexplicably comforting to others. Yabamiya put down the dish on her plate, and shook her head with a serious expression. I'm sorry, sir, but we only provide 1 helping of tofu pudding per meal. This is the restaurant's rule, and it's written on the menu. I have money, and I can double the price as long as you give me another helping. Gourmet placed his money bag on the table, and it clanged as he looked at Yabamiya with a domineering expression. She was just a half-dragon waitress, so how could she turn down a business offer that was delivered to her door? I'm sorry, but this is the restaurant's rule. Yabamiya was a little flustered, but she thought about how Meg had decisively rejected Crassus and Julian, and how Roxia had offered 10 times the price. If she had to rely on Meg for such trivial matters, then she wouldn't be doing her job well. Thus, she mustered up her courage and shook her head. Hey, little half-dragon girl, you don't understand what I'm saying, do you? I'm the owner of the largest watch shop in the Aden Square, and I'm also a member of the board of directors of the Aden Square Merchants Union. I think this restaurant only opened recently, right? If you want to join the Chamber of Commerce in the future, I have the right to veto you. Gourmet's eyes widened, and he continued, also, our Chamber of Commerce has agreed that since last year, none of our stores are allowed to hire half-race waiters. You're violating the rules, and as long as I report this to the Chamber of Commerce, you'll lose your job today, and your boss will also be fined. I. Yabamiya was so flustered that she didn't know what to say. She suddenly understood why the boss was so harsh on her the last time she came out of the kitchen. It turned out that she had to pay a fine for hiring a half-racial waitress. She vaguely remembered that the boss had bragged that he was a director of some chamber of commerce when he was drunk. She didn't want to lose this job that allowed her to find her dignity, recognition, and warmth. She also didn't want Meg to be fined because of her. He was such a good person. How could she cause him more trouble? For a moment, she was so anxious that tears welled up in her eyes. I see. I was wondering why I haven't seen any mixed-race waiters in the Aden Square in the past 2 years. I've heard of this rule. Even though some mixed-race waiters are a little scary, you can't just kill everyone. I think Little Boss and Miss Mia are very good. Yeah, but if there really is such a rule, then Mr. Mac wouldn't be able to keep her as a waitress, right? I heard. The Aden Chamber of Commerce only accounts for less than 1/3 of the shops in the Aden Square, and all of them are the most popular shops in the Aden Square. Now, they can only increase the number of members by 10 per year, and many shops are trying their best to get in. Sigh, what a pity for Miss Mia. She's such a hard-working girl. If I were the boss, I would love an employee like her. All of the customers began to whisper among themselves as they looked at Yabamiya with pity in their eyes. But she's doing a great job, isn't she? Gloria looked at Yabamiya and clenched her fists. The Aden Chamber of Commerce is very complicated. All of the major families are involved, including our 2 families. The City Lord's castle also has some connections. Roxia shook her head as she looked at Yabamiya with pity in her eyes. Although the situation was different from what Gourmet had said, if Meg wanted to join the Aden Chamber of Commerce, Yabamiya would be sacrificed sooner or later. The Aden Chamber of Commerce's requirements were very strict. What do you think? Gourmet had a smug smile on his face. As an experienced businessman who had been in business for over 30 years, he knew how to use his bargaining chips to manipulate the emotions of others. Of course, he was only here to eat today, and he was a little displeased that he could only have one serving of such delicious tofu pudding. But I'm in a good mood today, so if you let me have another serving of sweet tofu pudding, I'll forgive you. Goudinia's face was filled with a smug smile. But I'm in a good mood today, so if you let me have another serving of sweet tofu pudding, I'll forgive you. It's nothing. A cold voice came from the kitchen. Everyone looked in the direction of the kitchen in surprise. Meg walked out of the door with a plate of Yangzhou fried rice in his left hand. His expression was natural, but his eyes were cold. Boss. Yabamiya also turned around, tears welling up in her eyes. Your Yangzhou fried rice. Meg put the plate of Yangzhou fried rice in front of a customer and smiled. Thank you. The customer looked at Meg and nodded. Meg stepped in front of Goudnia and shook his head seriously. Sir, each person can only order one tofu pudding per meal. We'll treat all customers the same. Goudnia nodded at Meg. You can only order one tofu pudding per meal. You're the boss, right? I'm Goudnia. Let me tell you. Goudnia looked at Meg, who was standing in front of Yabamiya, with a bit of surprise. He didn't expect Meg to refuse to sell him an extra serving of tofu pudding. It seemed that he had to let Meg know how powerful the Aden Chamber of Commerce was. I don't know how powerful your so-called Aden Chamber of Commerce is, but since you've set the rule that members can't hire half-race waiters, I won't join your Aden Chamber of Commerce. Meg interrupted Goudnia. Goudinia's mouth was wide open in disbelief. He put the bag of Rugiamo back on the table and continued with a smile, besides, my daughter is a half-elf. I use her back as the logo of the restaurant, and I use half of her name as the name of the restaurant. I don't think it's inappropriate. I'm sorry. I have no interest in joining a trade union that refuses to use healthy half-breeds as service staff. Furthermore, such a trade union would probably close down very soon. The smile on Meg's face gradually disappeared. Meg turned the menu over and looked at Goudnia. Also, the second rule of the restaurant, customers are not allowed to threaten the boss or the staff. Mr. Goudnia, right? You're now on the blacklist. You're not allowed to enter the restaurant anymore. You can leave now. Chapter 198. You. Goudinia's mouth gaped open as he stared at Meg with incredulity in his eyes. He couldn't believe what he had just heard. This fellow actually said that he didn't care to join the Aden Chamber of Commerce, and even questioned whether the Aden Chamber of Commerce, which had existed for over 50 years and stood at the top of all the chambers of commerce on the Norland continent, would close down soon. Now, they had even blacklisted him and wanted him to leave immediately. The owner of a restaurant that had only been open for less than half a month, a brat who didn't seem to have any shrewdness, actually dared to say such words to him. He actually rejected it. Harrison was shocked. His old man had spent a lot of money to bribe his way into the Aden Chamber of Commerce for the past 2 years, but he still hadn't given him an answer yet. Even the leaders of the Aden Chamber of Commerce had to lower their voices to serve them. That was why he wanted to speak up for Yabamiya, but he held himself back in the end. He knew that with Meg's personality, he probably wouldn't fire Yabamiya. However, he didn't expect that Meg would blacklist him and refuse to join the Aden Chamber of Commerce. By saying that in public, he would cut off all chances of joining the Aden Chamber of Commerce. Even though most of the restaurants in the Aden Square weren't affiliated with the Chamber of Commerce, the top 10 on the Aden Square were all restaurants with the Chamber of Commerce's emblem. Even though the Aden Square but it's really fucking satisfying to talk back to a Chamber of Commerce director like this. Mr. Mack is our role model. Harrison looked at Meg with admiration. I don't think there's a need for my blacksmith shop to join the Aden Chamber of Commerce. Anyway, it's just a small business in Chaos City. There's no need for us to serve those big shots. George nodded thoughtfully at Meg's departing figure, but he didn't say anything. Rejected. Gloria looked at Meg and clenched her fists in excitement. However, she quickly realized that she was acting a little different from usual. She lowered her head in embarrassment, but her eyes under the black veil were still staring at Meg. It was as if there were stars in her eyes. He was a good boss and a good father. For the sake of his daughter, he could refuse things that others could only wish for and drive customers out of the store. His shoulders were not considered broad, but they looked so reassuring. This was the first time she had met such a person. He was so special. Although his words are a bit arrogant, he is indeed an interesting person. Roxia was also looking at Mag with a hint of surprise on her face. She knew better than anyone else what the benefits of joining the Chamber of Commerce were. Otherwise, those slime merchants wouldn't have tried so hard to join the Chamber of Commerce. He's really a good boss. Everyone present was unable to hide their astonishment as they thought to themselves, there's probably no other boss in the Aden Square who's willing to offend the Chamber of Commerce for a half-dragon employee. Many people heaved a sigh of relief at the sight of Yabamiya. Over the past few days, seeing this half-dragon girl's smile had put them in a good mood, so they naturally didn't want her to leave the restaurant in such a dejected manner. He's so handsome. He's so handsome. I want to be a waiter too. I want to be protected by Mr. Mac like this. The little girl from before clasped her hands over her chest as she looked at Meg with admiration. What are you talking about? Eat. The plump woman sitting across from her smacked the little girl's forehead with her spoon. Ugh. The little girl held her forehead in pain, and obediently scooped a spoonful of rice into her mouth. She still refused to look away from Meg. Meg's protectiveness had also won the approval of many people. In order to enjoy such delicious food, most people were willing to abide by the restaurant's rules. Even the two great magic casters, Julian and Crassus, would obediently leave after eating a bowl of tofu pudding. However, Goodnia was using the Aden Chamber of Commerce and Yabamiya's status to pressure Meg. That was quite despicable. Boss. Yabamiya looked at Mag's departing figure, and the tears that were welling up in her eyes finally flowed out. They slid down her cheeks and fell to the ground, but she felt as if something had suddenly filled her body. It was warm and fuzzy. She wasn't being scolded by the boss, nor was she being ridiculed by the customers. Instead, she was being protected by Meg. In that instant, she felt as if she were no longer alone. She had a powerful backer who could shelter her from the storm. Your smile is your most powerful weapon. Only people with a twisted mind think they're better than others. He pulled out a gray square handkerchief and handed it over to her. Don't worry, Mia, Mag said with a gentle smile as he pulled out a gray square handkerchief and handed it over to her. Yes. Yabamiya looked up into Mag's gentle eyes, and all the strength in her body came back. She took the handkerchief and held it tightly in her hand, but she wiped her tears with the back of her hand, and put on a smile again, showing her two cute little canine teeth. Humph. You're just the owner of a small restaurant, and you dare to be so arrogant. You want to shut down the Aden Chamber of Commerce. Let's see how long you can keep this restaurant open. Goudinia's expression darkened. He had never been treated like this in the Aden Square ever since he had been elected as a board member of the Chamber of Commerce at the beginning of the year. He grabbed the money bag on the table, and as he rose to his feet, he deliberately pushed his chair back. The chair fell to the ground with a thump, and a corner was broken. A sweet tofu pudding, a plate of Yangzhou fried rice, and a broken chair. That's 18 gold coins in total. Check it out. Amy appeared at the door with Ugly Duckling in her arms. She looked up at Goodnia with a serious expression. Meow, meow. Ugly Duckling also bared its teeth at him, trying its best to be fierce. Go away, little guy. It's your honor to have me here. You know, I eat in all the restaurants in the Aiden Square for free. If you keep blocking my way, don't blame me for being rude, Goodnia said coldly. Goodnia said coldly. It was absolutely impossible for him to accept such an insult. Moreover, charging 10 gold coins for a broken chair. Did they think he was a sucker for a fool? Everyone turned to look at Goodnia in unison, and strange expressions appeared on their faces as if they were looking at a dead man. Threatening the disciple of 2 great magic casters right in front of them. This guy is most likely going to die. Here's the rest. Next time you eat, you'd better pay, or I'll burn you again. The door opened with a ding, and Amy walked out. She threw the purse in front of Goodnia with a serious expression. Goodnia put away his wallet, feeling a bit humiliated. He wanted to say something, but when he thought of the terrifying flames, he swallowed his words. A 4-year-old magician was too scary. A man should know when to yield and when to stand tall. There was no need for him to be so quick with his words. Hello, little boss, Sargeras said seriously. Hello, little boss. Keel and Mond immediately stood at attention with respectful expressions. In their eyes, Meg, who could make such a magical Rigiamo, was worthy of respect. The fate of the lava race depended on this Rigiamo, so they showed great respect to Amy. Hello, Big Bald Head 2, and Bald Head 3, Amy greeted the 3 demons, then turned and walked into the restaurant. How is this possible? Goodnia stared at the 3 demons. How could they be afraid of a little half-elf? You want to dine and dash? Sargeras walked up to Goodnia and looked down at him with great interest. Then he pursed his lips. Even I wouldn't dare. You're a real warrior. Then he opened the door and walked into the restaurant. Warrior. Keel and Mond gave him a thumbs up at the same time, then followed Sargeras into the restaurant. What the hell is going on? Goodnia struggled to get up from the ground. Looking at his broken clothes and the luxurious restaurant, he wanted to cry. What kind of background does this restaurant have? Goodnia took a deep look at the restaurant. For the first time in his life, he felt fear. He covered his face with his hands and limped towards the outer circle of the square. Most of the merchants in the square knew him. He wanted to save face. I'm sorry. Something happened. Please continue. I hope you enjoy your meal. Meg looked at everyone apologetically. Then he raised his hand to stop Yabamiya, who was about to bow and apologize. He looked back at her and smiled. You didn't do anything wrong. Thank you, boss, Yabamiya said in a low voice. Don't mention it, Mr. Mac. We all supported you today. It's just that my Rigiamo. I'm a little hungry. Harrison smiled and rubbed his belly. Yeah, and my tofu pudding. My Yangzhou fried rice. Everyone else chimed in with smiles on their faces. The atmosphere in the restaurant became harmonious again. They all thought Meg had done the right thing. Okay, please wait a moment. Meg nodded with a smile. He patted Yabamiya on the shoulder and walked toward the kitchen. Welcome. When she heard the doorbell ring, a vibrant smile appeared on Yabamiya's face again, and she turned around to greet him. I've made up my mind. I'm going to memorize Mamie's rules today. Ha! If Boss Mag says he's going to blacklist him, then he's really blacklisted him. If Little Boss says he's going to start a fire, then he's really going to start a fire. We can't afford to offend them. We can't afford to offend them. Harrison and the others huddled together to memorize the restaurant rules. They had never been so serious, not even when they were studying at Chaos School. Wait, I think I saw Mr. Mack write something down in a black notebook. Really? Is that the legendary blacklist? Chapter 200. This incident didn't take up too much of his time, so Meg continued to cook. His mood wasn't affected, and he wasn't worried about Goudinia's vengeance. He was just a board member of the Chamber of Commerce. What could he do? Many of the customers in the restaurant were most likely from the Aden Chamber of Commerce. Even customers with Grey Temple badges had been here a few times. He could handle most of the storms in Chaos City by grabbing their stomachs. As for Julian and Crassus, they were the ultimate trump card. If the two of them worked together, no one on the entire continent would be able to defeat them. He had stood up for Yabamiya today to establish the restaurant's reputation and store rules. He didn't want to appear too powerful, but he had to tell everyone his bottom line. Amy was his bottom line, and no one was allowed to touch her. It didn't matter if he couldn't beat her. He could blacklist her. For a foodie, not being allowed to eat was probably worse than being beaten up. As for the Aden Chamber of Commerce, which banned half-racial waitresses, Meg didn't mind giving it a push if he had the chance. Of course, Meg wasn't naive enough to think that he could overthrow a major chamber of commerce with his current abilities. He didn't even have the right to talk to them yet. However, just because he couldn't do it now didn't mean that he couldn't do it in the future. Meg had seen too much of this in his previous life. It was normal for businessmen to rise and fall. No matter how sturdy a building was, there would be a day when it would decay and collapse. This was especially true when there was a technological revolution. The established business model would be greatly impacted, and a new bourgeoisie would rise. If the ruling class of this world is still so decadent, I don't mind bringing them into the era of the Industrial Revolution and changing their rulers, Meg thought to himself. He looked up at the bicycle under the counter outside. Although he had spent most of his time slacking off in university, he still graduated from one of the top 10 mechanical design majors in the world. As long as he had the money, changing the world with machinery wasn't just a dream. Honey. Did the scar on my face really fade? Really? Aw. I love you, honey. It faded. It faded. It's really faded. Wah, mother. The scar on my forehead is finally gone. All types of elated voices rang out in the restaurant, and there were even some who were crying tears of joy. Most of them were customers whose scars had improved after eating the tofu pudding. Just one bowl. It shouldn't be too much, right? In the corner, Joel looked down at the scar on his chest, then at the bowl of savory tofu pudding in front of him, and fell into deep thought. Whatever. I can't wait, I'll eat it first. I'll just draw some more. His hesitation only lasted for a while. The faint fragrance of beans made him pick up the spoon and eat. The hesitation on his face was immediately replaced by a sense of pleasure. After a short while, he finished the entire bowl of tofu pudding. Joel put down the spoon in his hand as if he hadn't had enough. Suddenly, he opened his shirt and looked down. He put down his shirt with a dejected expression, and sighed to himself. I've lost 2 badges from more than 20 years ago. If this continues, I won't even know what to brag about in the future. I used to think I could brag until I was 80 years old. Sigh, let's go, Luo Xia said softly to Gloria as she gave the money to Amy. Okay. Gloria nodded slightly and stood up gracefully. When she walked to the door, she couldn't help but look back at the kitchen. Through the glass, she could see Meg's profile as he cooked seriously. Sure enough, a serious man was the most attractive. Gloria. Luo Xia, who was pressing on the door, turned around to look at Gloria with a puzzled expression. She also looked in the direction that Gloria was looking at, and a smile appeared on her face. Yes, this man was indeed fatally attractive to women. No matter if it was his looks, cooking skills, or protective personality, every woman dreamed of marrying such a perfect man. Unfortunately, he already had a daughter. Okay. Gloria quickly withdrew her gaze. Her face behind the black veil blushed slightly. She quickly lowered her head and followed Luo Xia out of the door. A luxurious carriage soon stopped at the door. The two of them got in one after another, and the carriage slowly drove away. Take off your veil. I'll show you. As soon as they sat down, Luo Xia looked at Gloria and said. She looked nervous and expectant. Okay. Gloria hesitated for a moment. Looking at Luo Xia's encouraging eyes, she slowly untied the string of the veil and took it off. Luo Xia's eyes lit up. What a stunning appearance. She was also a woman, and her eyes lit up. Her thick, light blonde, slightly curly hair was casually tied up with a purple hair tie. It was so close to the seat that it almost reached the floor. Her delicate facial features seemed to have been sculpted by God with the most delicate skills. Long eyelashes, light purple eyes, small cherry lips, and snow-white, sparkling skin. Her limbs were slender, but her chest was quite impressive. The black dress still couldn't hide her impressive figure. If it weren't for the thumb-sized tan spot on the left side of her face, she would definitely be a beauty who could attract people's attention on the street. That spot was like a stone falling into a pot of tofu pudding, and it ruined a perfect and delicate work of art. It really faded. The black turned into a tan. It really worked. Luo Xia looked at the spot and suddenly held Gloria's hand in surprise. Really? Gloria's pretty face was also full of surprise and disbelief. Her slender fingers touched her cheek gently. She had only eaten one serving, and it would be a surprise if the black color could fade a little. But now it turned directly into a tan. Such an obvious and intuitive change. Of course it's true. When have I ever lied to you? You can go home and look at yourself in the mirror. Luo Xia nodded with a smile. Then she reached out and rolled up her sleeves. She pointed at the scar on it and said, Look, isn't it a little smaller than when I came here? It's true. Gloria's eyes lit up, and her voice unconsciously became a little lighter. The burn scar on Luo Xia's hand did become smaller, and the skin that hadn't healed began to flatten. It seemed that it would be healed in a few days. Believe me, it won't be long before the spot on your face is healed, just like my scar. Luo Xia touched Gloria's head gently and said with a smile, Then you can wear beautiful clothes and go out. Those men won't be willing to move their eyes away from you. Chapter 201. After lunch, Meg turned down a customer's request to enter the shop with a smile on his face. He turned over the sign on the door and looked at Amy, who was scratching Ugly Duckling in her arms, with a smile on her face. Father, what time is Amy going to go to school? Amy looked at Meg with anticipation in her eyes. Her father seemed a little different today, but she couldn't pinpoint exactly what was different about him. Master Crassus said that you can be there before 2, so Amy should take a nap before going. Meg walked over with a smile and patted Amy's head. Okay. Amy squinted her eyes and rubbed her head against Meg's hand like a kitten. Ugly Duckling was also rubbing its head against her little hand. Boss, if you're too busy in the morning, maybe I can take Amy to school, Yabamiya, who was wiping the table, said to Meg with sincerity in her eyes. Well. Meg pondered. Just as Yabamiya had said, it was indeed a little rushed in the morning. It would take about half an hour to take Amy to school, and putting the tofu pudding in the pot first would affect its texture to a certain extent. But Big Sister Mia, do you know how to ride a bicycle? Amy looked up at Mia with a serious expression. Mia was taken aback. She glanced at the counter. That two-wheeled thing would fall to the ground if it was placed there. Only a genius like Boss Mag could make something like that and drive it perfectly. I don't know how to ride. Mia shook her head. Then it'll take us a long time to walk, and Amy will have to wake up even earlier. But I want to sleep a little longer tomorrow. Amy looked at Yabamiya with a conflicted expression. I can learn. I can learn how to ride a bicycle. Yabamiya hesitated momentarily before looking at Meg with a determined expression. Boss, teach me how to ride a bicycle. Okay. Amy clapped her hands and looked up at Meg. Father, why don't you teach big sister Mia how to ride a bicycle? That way, she can send me to school on a bicycle. Well, it's not impossible, but... Meg nodded. Yabamiya obviously wanted to share some of his workload, but bicycling was not easy to learn, especially for Yabamiya who had just seen a bicycle for the first time. Bicycling is not easy to learn. It's not something that can be mastered in a short period of time. It's easy to fall in the beginning. It's okay, I'm not afraid of pain. Yabamiya shook her head, her eyes filled with determination. All right, father, please teach big sister Mia, Amy said coquettishly as she shook Meg's hand. Okay, then I'll teach Mia when I'm free. Meg smiled as he patted Amy's head. He really didn't know what to do with the two of them. He paused for a moment before saying, but I happen to have to go out at noon. After sending Amy to school, I'll make a trip to the employment agency. The restaurant needs another employee. So, you're going to hire another pretty sister? Amy's eyes lit up as she looked at Meg curiously. Boss, Yabamiya lowered her head slightly, her expression filled with self-blame. It seemed that she was too useless. She couldn't even do such a job well. Mia, you've already done very well. No waitress can do a better job than you. Meg looked at Yabamiya with a smile as he shook his head, and said, but if I let you do everything on your own, you'll appear to be in too much of a hurry. You won't even be able to give a proper smile to the customers, and you'll be running around the restaurant like a whirlwind. That's not what I had in mind. You'll be too tired, and the customers will also appear to be a little uncomfortable. I understand, boss. Yabamiya nodded with a thoughtful expression, and didn't say anything else. Then what kind of pretty sister should we find? Amy asked as she looked at Meg with curiosity in her eyes. It would be best if we could find someone as capable as Mia, Meg replied with a smile. Meow. Ugly Duckling raised its head and let out a cry in an attempt to attract Amy's attention. It seemed to have sensed that its status was about to drop again. Amy slept on the counter for a while, and when it was about time, Meg woke her up. He pushed the bicycle out, and Amy climbed onto the back seat. She turned around and waved at Ugly Duckling, who was sitting at the entrance, and said, Come here, Ugly Duckling. Meow. Ugly Duckling looked at the basket in front of the bicycle, and shook its head with a reluctant expression. Forget it, it's carsick, so let's just let it stay at home. Meg turned around to look at Ugly Duckling with a smile. He then got onto the bicycle, and turned to Amy, and asked, Are you ready? Yes, let's go. Amy nodded with elation as she spread open her little arms. A smile appeared on Meg's face as he stomped his foot, and the bicycle immediately shot forward like an arrow. After upgrading his strength, Meg felt that each and every stomp of his foot was much more powerful, and he was able to maintain his current speed. Even with such a flashy two-wheeled bicycle traveling at such a fast speed, the number of people who turned to look at it was still off the charts. Could it be that this is the latest flying magic spell? Probably. If you add wheels, it will look pretty cool. When the passers-by saw this scene, they started to analyze it one by one. It's faster than a horse-drawn carriage. 2. 3. Father is so awesome. Amy yelled with elation as she spread open her arms. She wasn't afraid of such a fast speed at all. Instead, she was quite excited, and wanted nothing more than for Meg to go faster. The bicycle stopped at the entrance of the school, and before Meg had a chance to say anything, Amy had already jumped off the bicycle. She looked at Meg, and shook her head as she said, "Father, you don't have to go in. I can find the classroom on my own. Goodbye." Goodbye. Be a good girl and study magic." Meg nodded with a smile. Amy had been running around Chaos City since she was a little girl, so she could play with other children on the first day of class, so he didn't have to worry about her finding the classroom. I will." Amy waved her hand, and walked into the school. When she passed by the guard at the entrance, she greeted the old man and the orc. "Hello, Grandpa Radish, Uncle Red Turtle." The two men who had just raised their hands were left standing there with stiff smiles on their faces. Meg face-bombed. This little girl really didn't let go of any opportunity to give others a nickname. However, Meg glanced at the old man who was wearing a white short suit and had almost all of his hair falling off. There was also an orc who had short dark red hair and was holding a black shield that looked like a tortoise's shell. This nickname was a little appropriate. Grandpa Radish. Uncle Red Turtle. Chapter 202. Meg nodded at the two of them with a smile before riding away on his bicycle. What could he do? He couldn't do anything about his girl's innate ability. Antoine and Arnold glanced at one another before shrugging in a resigned manner. The fact that Mag had received a pass from Headmaster Novin and was held in such high regard by Heidel indicated that he was definitely not an ordinary person. Furthermore, he most likely belonged to Chaos School. However, they had been the guards of Chaos School for many years, and had seen all kinds of mischievous students. It was really rare to see an elementary school student come over with two nicknames just for a greeting. Meg didn't hurry back to the Aiden Square. Instead, he rode along the streets of Chaos School. Even though he had been living a pitiful life for the past few years, Meg Alex was still quite familiar with Chaos City, so he decided to go to a place based on his memory. Even though there were 8 gates in Chaos City, it was actually a large square city. There were 2 straight streets that ran through the entire city, dividing it into 9 regions that were shaped like a well. The Aiden Square was located in the middle of the southern part of the city, and to the right was Chaos School. Apart from Chaos School, most of the people living in this area were teachers and their families, as well as people who worked in the literary and cultural fields. This was the area where most of the intellectuals in Chaos City lived. On the left side of the Aiden Square was Chaos City's renowned Bowtie Prison. The prison occupied an entire area, and was one of the most famous prisons on the entire Norland continent. Aside from being known as the most difficult prison to break into, the most special thing about it was that there were prisoners of all races locked up in it. This prison had been set up ever since Chaos City was founded. The peace treaty was signed in Chaos City, and the war between races that had lasted for thousands of years came to an end. The continent was divided into 8 parts, and a new chapter of relative peace began. At the same time, some of the people who had killed innocent people during the war were put on trial, and all of them were locked up in the Bowtie prison. Back then, the construction of the prison was funded by all races, and the best craftsmen and engineers from all races had done their best to build it. Most of the buildings were tens of meters, and some were even hundreds of meters underground. The guardians of the prison were very powerful. It was said that they could defend against the attacks of a team of 10 dragons. It was not an exaggeration to say that the prison was impregnable. Chaos City could be said to be built on the foundation of the Bowtie prison. It was for this reason that Meg's house didn't have an exit, because the Bawtai prison's walls were 10 meters away. Behind the walls was the prison built underground. Some of the long-lived prisoners were still in their prime even after 100 years had passed. Occasionally, there would be rumors of prisoners breaking out of the prison. However, in the past 100 years, no prisoners had ever come out of the Bawtai prison. This added a layer of legend to the Bawtai prison. The place Meg was going to today was the street behind the Aiden Square. That was the center of the entire Chaos City, and was regarded as the safest place in Chaos City. On the left side of the street was the Grey Temple, on the right side was the street where the City Lord lived, and on the north side was where the garrison of Chaos City was stationed. It was a wealthy area where every inch of land was worth its weight in gold. Meg rode his bicycle along the wide avenue. After seeing some magnificent buildings in the distance, he turned into a side alley. "System, give me some disguise items. I want to change my appearance," Meg said in his heart as he stopped the bicycle. The system, cash. Meg took out a bag of money impatiently. The system can provide a variety of disguises for the host. According to the difficulty, the fees are as follows: 1. Ordinary disguise, 2 gold coins, 2. Disguise plus ordinary makeup, 4 gold coins, 3. Disguise plus advanced makeup, 6 gold coins, 4. Female disguise, 10 gold coins. Which one would the host like to choose? The system's voice suddenly became cheerful. The system recommends the fourth option. The system will provide you with thousands of sets of female clothing for the host to choose from. At the same time, you will be given 1 free use of makeup, 1 free use of wigs, and 1 free use of high-end jewelry. You will also be given 1 free use of a real-time voice changer, which costs 10 gold coins to activate permanently, the system continued. What the hell is female clothing? System, are you not a fucking decent system? Meg almost jumped up. Host, please don't look down on women's clothing. From the perspective of camouflage, changing one's personality is the best way to perfectly hide all traces of you. No one would ever think that a sexy and enchanting succubus is actually a restaurant owner. Isn't that exciting? The system said solemnly. Nonsense. Meg pursed his lips. This system was becoming more and more unreliable. Female clothing. No way. Unless you give me another strength point or 50,000 gold coins, do you think you can trick me into wearing female clothing? However, Meg quickly regained his composure. The system is only providing suggestions. The host can choose on his own. The system immediately shut up. What's the level of advanced makeup? Meg looked at the package and asked. Advanced makeup refers to the host's entire body makeup. The host can choose age, identity, and gender. The system will make the most suitable makeup according to the host's requirements to make you more suitable for your identity and age. No one will be able to tell from your appearance. The system's voice sounded. What about ordinary makeup? Meg asked again. Ordinary makeup is 2 fake eyebrows, 2 fake mustaches, and a little white powder on the face. That's all. The system responded. Very ordinary indeed. Meg nodded thoughtfully, then said decisively, then I'll choose the third option. My identity is a bard, male human, 60 years old. That's it. Ding. 6 gold coins have been deducted. The clothes are being customized. It will arrive in 3 minutes. The system's voice sounded. Meg felt the wallet in his hand become much lighter. However, he had something to do today, so it was better to be cautious. By the way, system, can you help me put away the bicycle first? If it's stolen, I won't be happy. Meg looked at the bicycle beside him and asked again. There was only 1 bicycle in the whole city. Of course, he couldn't ride it. Otherwise, why would he disguise himself? Even if he exposed himself, it wouldn't be effective.